You're a real person now. How are you? This is Sean.
Hello, Sean. Welcome to the group. Okay.
Yeah, I was on the mission trip last week with the
Again?
to Dominican Science Festival. Paid my own way. Paid my own way. Paid double that, so it's was Larry and
We'll go ahead and get started, everybody. It is 1 o'clock, so Mr. Chan, will you call the roll, please? Mr. Bridges.
I would be too, and
Can I have your attention, please? We're ready to get started. It's 1 o'clock, so Mr. Chan, please call the roll.
Mr. Bridges?
Present.
Mr. Facker?
Here.
Mr. Fitzpatrick? Dr. Goyle?
Here.
Ms. Green? Mr. Langos?
Here.
Ms. Montgomery? General Moore?
Here.
Ms. Ramos? Mr. Raines?
Here.
Mr. Wenrick?
Here.
Got a quorum.
Thank you. I would like to welcome Sean Wenrick of the overachieving Wenrick family here at Wright State University. His brother Lucas, we all know well, to the board as a student trustee. So welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself. Take a minute or two.
Yeah, this is my 4th year at Wright State. I've lived in the residence halls the last 3 years. I moved to the apartments on campus. This year as a head RA, I'm an early childhood education major, and I'm just excited to be here.
Good, thank you. Go ahead and read our conflict of interest statement. It is of utmost importance to ensure that all university decisions are free from any real or perceived conflicts of interest. Therefore, please be mindful of all obligations with which you have been charged as a trustee of Wright State University, and take the steps you deem appropriate to perform your duties fairly and impartially. Having seen the agenda for today's meeting, do any trustees have any conflicts they'd like to make me aware of? Hearing none, if through the conversation you come up with one, please notify me as chair, and we'll handle that accordingly when that time comes. This meeting has been called by written notification, and a quorum is present. Today is really a meeting that we started last year, so it's the second time to have a Sunday board meeting. The express purpose of is updating and training of the board. It's an obligation that we need to take seriously and stay on top of our obligations, and so that's the main purpose of today. We also will enter an executive session as soon as we practically can because of some issues that came up last evening in regards to legal and real estate and the types of things that we cover in executive session. So when we're ready to do that, we'll move into it. Also at your place, I have the committee assignments for next year. They're the same as last year. With the exception of C.D. Moore as vice chair is now for the executive committee, and Sean, you've been assigned to the committees that were formerly held by your predecessor, Joe Kingsley. So if you have any questions of me about that, please let me know after the meeting, but I want to make sure that we get our committee assignments established and we can move on from there. That really is all I have for my announcements. And again, the purpose of our meeting today is board training, and I think one of the things that we always want to make sure we cover is our obligations under Ohio law, particularly regards to public records and Open Meetings Act. So we have invited from the Ohio Attorney General's office, Heather Buchanan, to come and help us take us through that training. And so I saw her here somewhere. She's back there, hiding behind me. So without further ado, we'll go ahead.
Great.
What's that? Oh, I'm sorry, before you go, Heather, this is our new provost, Susan Edwards, who I've just met for the first time today. So I made Sean tell him a little about himself, so you have to do the same thing.
Okay. I'm joining you from Appalachian State. I'm a physiologist. I have an interest in a fish that I won't go into. I promised President Schroeder I wouldn't do that. I am coming from a Vice Provost of Faculty Affairs, which I've been for 3 years. I've been in the United States for 11 years, previously from Australia, as you can tell by probably my accent, and became a US citizen last year, so no intention of going back. So I am very thrilled to be here, and thank you very much for having me, primarily because I see the potential here. might state, and I can't wait to, watch it be unleashed. So thank you very much for the work you do, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Great, thank you, congratulations, and thank you for pointing it out. When I missed something, I rely on you all to help me realize I missed something. So Heather, it is all yours.
Great. As we get set up here, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Heather Buchanan. There we go, perfect, thank you very much. I am a Senior Assistant Attorney General at the Ohio Attorney General's Office. I am in our Constitutional Offices section. Housed within that section is the Public Records Unit of the Ohio Attorney General's Office. So what we get to do as part of that unit is travel around the state and talk to various groups about legal obligations under the Ohio Public Records Act as well as the Open Meetings Act. We also do the 3-hour trainings that elected officials or their representatives are required to do every couple of years. We also put together yearly this yellow book here. We call it the yellow book, the Ohio Sunshine Laws Manual, and I'm going to go ahead and put a plug in for it now because what I'm going to give you today is really a big picture overview. Obviously, these topics, you can go into a lot more detail. We have a limited amount of time. I want to make sure that I cover some of the main points and specifically things that are going to be pertinent to what you all do. But if you want to take a deeper dive, this is where to go. This is available online in searchable format. I've got a link to it at the end of the presentation. And if you want your own hard copy that you can tab like I do here, let me know. I'm happy to get one for you. So, let's see. So we're going to start with the Ohio Open Meetings Act. And just the general tenets of the Open Meetings Act that applies to public bodies, which this board is. And when there's a prearranged gathering, a majority of the members of that public body are present and the members are discussing or conducting public business. Generally, public bodies are just what we think of as the decision-making levels of government, anything from a local school board up to the governor's office in Ohio. And importantly, the Open Meetings Act can apply to committees and subcommittees of a public body. So a committee that is formed by a public body is not always considered its own public body, but it's going to depend on certain circumstances such as why was that committee formed, what does the committee have the authority to do, those kinds of things. But if a committee is found by a court to be its own public body, it has to follow the tenets of the Open Meetings Act that we're going to talk about soon. And I should have mentioned, feel free to ask questions as we go. I know I'm going to kind of cover a lot of this ground pretty quickly again because we don't have too much time. But do feel free to ask questions as I go.
Well, I think regarding our committees, we have always considered our committees to be public bodies in and of themselves, and we followed the rules at committee meetings in addition to just board meetings. So I don't know that we've been, in my time here, ever had a committee that we didn't consider to be a public body.
I know that to some people that's kind of surprising to hear that a committee could be considered its own public body, but I think that's probably a good course of action, and I know when we get questions about it from people, how do I know if my committee is or is not a public body, we always say ask whoever your legal representative is, because it is a very fact-intensive analysis, but good rule of thumb.
So like the finance committee, we have 3 members, I think, 4, but anyway, 2 I think would be the majority. So any 2 people on the finance committee get together, it's a public meeting. Is that how that would be interpreted?
How many members did you say?
There's 3 or 4 on the committee, right?
There are, on the finance committee, there are
Well, is it-
4.
Yeah, so 2
Yeah.
would be majority. So any 2 people from the finance committee meet together, it's a public meeting.
Well, it has to be a prearranged gathering discussing or conducting public business. So that's not to say any time these 2 people are together, but yes, if those other things are present, then possibly an open meeting. So, on the issue of an open meeting, just as I mentioned, it has to be prearranged, it has to be a discussion of public business going on, and a majority of the members have to be present. And if this means there are only 3 members of this committee, subcommittee, whatever it is, 2 2 people are gonna be the majority there. So importantly, a meeting doesn't have to be called a meeting. A public body can call its meeting a work retreat, a work session, a day out, a happy hour, whatever you want to call it. If these 3 elements here are present, the court's going to consider it an open meeting under the law. And so it's, like I said, it doesn't matter what it's called. You need to look at the elements of what's going on. And another important point on meetings is that Ohio courts have held that back-to-back scheduled meetings with each of these meetings may have fewer than the actual majority of the public body, but collectively such back-to-back meetings can be considered a meeting. And courts have called these round-robin meetings, serial meetings, again, separate meetings, but attended by less than a majority, but if they're discussing public business added together, these could be considered a meeting, and if they're not open, in violation of the Open Meetings Act. So, one example that came to the Ohio Supreme Court not too long ago, the Ohio Supreme Court held that serial email communications between a majority of members of a public body is no different substantively than previous case law holding that in-person, back-to-back serial meetings are meetings under the Open Meetings Act. So just quickly some facts about White v. King. Again, this came up to the Ohio Supreme Court 2 years ago. It's not often that Open Meetings Act issues reach the Ohio Supreme Court, so this was significant for a couple of reasons. And just briefly, what happened here, Adam White, one of 5 members of the Olentangy Board of Education, was leading an investigation into some suspected misuse of funds. Some people were not happy about that. They implemented some rules related to what he could do as far as that investigation. The Columbus Dispatch decided to weigh in and wrote an editorial favoring Mr. White and how he was doing things. So the other 4 members of the school board started emailing each other about how they were going to, as a board, collectively respond to the Dispatch's editorial. What is going to be our official position as a board? And so these 4 members emailed back and forth over a period of time. By the time the next board meeting rolls around, they had reached a decision as to how they were going to respond to this editorial. Meanwhile, all of the discussion and deliberation of that decision had occurred over these emails. So Mr. White alleged that there was a violation of the Open Meetings Act in this conduct, and the Ohio Supreme Court agreed with him and ultimately ruled that the school board had violated the Open Meetings Act in the way that it conducted these round-robin emails, if you will. So I have a full quote from the Ohio Supreme Court case up here, which I think is pretty important. And the Supreme Court recognized that in today's day and age, more often than not, we seem to communicate electronically. I don't know too many boards that communicate by tweet, but text messages certainly go around, emails obviously go around. We communicate with each other in a lot of different ways these days. And in this case, the Supreme Court recognized this and said, if all of the elements of a meeting, if all the elements of the Ohio Open Meetings Act are present, even if it's just via email, the obligations of the Open Meetings Act are going to apply. But note that the meeting has to be discussion or deliberation of official business. So just because members of a board or public body are talking about where to meet for happy hour, obviously not official business. And the courts generally hold that deliberation involves the weighing or examination of reasons for or not to do something. So it has to be a going, back and forth, a discussion, deliberation, not just kind of mere sharing of information, if you will. And to that end, courts have held that certain things are not discussion or deliberation of official business, and these are information gathering, attending presentations, and just isolated conversations between employees. Obviously, members of a public body have to talk to each other. Every time they do that, the Open Meetings Act is not going to be triggered. So once the act is triggered, there are 3 general things that the public body has to make sure they do with every open meeting. The first is give notice of that meeting. The second is make sure that meeting is open to the public. And the third element is keeping minutes of the meeting. As to notice, the important point is that courts want notice to be consistent. That is issued at the same time, the same way every month for regular meetings. That way the public knows what to expect. They know, generally where to look for that information and what to expect from the public body. And it has to actually reach the public body. So if this means if a public body puts information in a newspaper, it has to be a local newspaper that the community reads and has access to. As far as the specific notice requirements, this is going to depend on what kind of meeting you have. So the law recognizes several different kinds of meetings, and the first is the regular meeting, and this is just the meeting that is held at pre-scheduled intervals, say the first Thursday of every month. Special meetings are basically anything other than a regular meeting. A reason why the board has to get together sooner or at a different time other than its pre-scheduled meeting time. If the public body is hosting a regular meeting, they only need to give notice of the time and place of the meeting. And if there's a special meeting, time and place, but also the purpose of the meeting, why are they meeting outside of the regular meeting schedule. Openness obviously means meetings have to be open to the public. And this means certain forum requirements. It has to be in a public location, a place that the entire public can access, an area large enough that the public can come into, and in a geographical area that public body serves. Openness also means that all official business has to be open, meaning not whispered, no secret ballots. Some of that might seem kind of common sense, but there are issues about that sometimes. Minutes have to be maintained for every open meeting, and the general requirements here are that minutes have to be promptly prepared, they have to be filed, they have to be maintained by the public body, such that anytime a member of the public wants to look at the minutes, they have to be fairly readily available. I mean, obviously in a reasonable amount of time, but and note that minutes of an open meeting are public records. So if there is, for some reason, an issue with the minutes of an open meeting, there could be potential public records issues as well as open meetings issues. So executive session is basically an exception to the openness requirement of the Open Meetings Act. And it's the only time really that Ohio law gives public bodies the opportunity to meet in private. And for this reason, because the Ohio General Assembly and the courts tend to err in general manner of openness, they construe executive session very narrowly, and there has to be very specific procedure and different rules to follow when going into executive session. So as far as the proper procedure for going into executive session, the first is that there has to be a motion on the record, a second on the record, and then a roll call vote that is approved by a majority of the quorum present of that public body. So, is there a question? Sorry. So the second kind of general procedural requirement is that executive session has to be sometime in the middle of the open meeting, and that does not mean smack dab in the middle. It only means that the public has to see the public body open in open session and then come back and close an executive session. I know often public bodies tend to do executive session kind of toward the end, but that you are required to then go back on the record, officially close out, and then be done. So the other important component of executive session is that a public body can convene into executive session only for very specific reasons. And these 9 reasons here are what Ohio courts, what the law has recognized as the only acceptable reasons to go into executive session. I'm not going to go into all of these in detail right now. Just the important takeaway is that the reason for going into executive session has to be specific, and it has to be put on the record in a way that the courts are going to know what component of these reasons the public body is complying with. And that also means that if the public body goes into executive session for one reason, something else comes up in executive session that's not within that reason, the public body has to go back out, reconvene, move into executive session, and start the whole process over again.
Would you explain number 8? Economic development assistance of cities, townships?
Yeah, this reason has to do with basically kind of the privacy of grants and those. I don't know too many specifics about it, but just generally the privacy of the financial position of certain agencies asking for public assistance grants. That it might include information about members of the community that are in public assistance, public housing, those kinds of issues, just as a general as a general matter. So yeah.
So today, when we enter executive session, there's 3 of those topics up there on there. The purchase and sale of real estate will be one of the topics. The second, they actually happen to be right in a row. The pending or imminent court action legal update, and then the third one is the collective bargaining update. All those are routine. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Who can the board invite? Is attendance at executive session limited in any way by the law? Like our attorneys come to give us updates, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes folks with knowledge about maybe a real estate deal or something like that. But there's no limitation, but it's a board invitation and so forth.
The only limitation is that the majority of the board cannot exclude the minority of the board. That is the only limitation. Otherwise, a public body can basically invite whoever they want to attend. It could be an attorney. That doesn't necessarily mean that whatever happens in an executive session is covered under attorney-client privilege, but if you're dealing with something such as pending or imminent court action, there's a good reason why an attorney is going to be present in that meeting. But yeah, otherwise, the public body can invite who they think needs to be present.
Thank you.
I have a question
Yeah.
on the numbers to go into executive session. I think I heard you say a majority of a quorum.
Mm-hmm.
So there are nine trustees in addition to our 2 student trustees on our board. So of the 9, let's say 6 people were in attendance, and 4 of those voted to go in executive session. That's 4 of 6. So that would be acceptable, correct? Even though 4 is less than half, 5 of 9.
It sounds like it. I'm not. And a quorum is kind of a term of art. It's whatever that public body needs to be able to conduct its business.
Okay.
So most often, my understanding is that means 51% of the public body, or along those lines.
Okay.
So yeah. So it would be whatever number your public body needs to be able to make to vote on things, to conduct official business. That's your quorum. So
Okay.
it's a majority of whatever that number is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So there's a few other things that we do that you may have noticed to ensure compliance with this law. One is when we have a meeting in a small room like this, you've probably seen somebody make sure the door's open. Because it's a public meeting, we don't do it behind closed doors. Also at the meetings, and again, in executive session, we invite our general counsel to be there, and one of the roles he plays is to make sure that we don't violate or go off these tenets. So that's one reason why we have Larry here, in addition to taking the role and so forth, but to make sure that we adhere to these rules. There's a couple other things, I can't remember what we are, but we're trying to adhere to these rules. I only bring it up because when I started on the board, I thought they were quirky, because we come onto the board maybe without this training, and find out there's good reasons for all those things that we do, so.
Sure. Yeah. Just looking in a little bit more depth at one of these reasons, personnel matters. That I know that's a major reason why a lot of public bodies convene into executive session. The law has enumerated these specific reasons that fall under personnel matters. Just knowing that courts have held a public body saying we are convening to go into executive session to discuss personnel matters and that's it. Courts have held that that's insufficient. So these are the reasons that are listed in the statute, and that those reasons within the context of what's going on, what's going to be discussed, has to be put on the record. So I don't think you can go wrong in putting as much information as you can without giving away obviously anything, you know, confidential onto the record. So
And a committee could go into executive session, but is still bound by these reasons.
exactly, yes. Yeah. Any other questions? I know we've kind of already addressed some of this here, but what not to do in executive session, make any official decisions such as voting. And the courts have held that making a decision to take no action on something is kind of the same thing as making any decision. I've already mentioned discussing other matters, discussing anything other than the precise reason why the public body went into executive session to begin with. And finally, before we leave Open Meetings Act, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, just kind of generally know there are penalties for violating the Open Meetings Act. If the court finds that the public body did violate the act, it can issue an injunction, it can issue a monetary fine, it can issue forfeiture fees. Invalidation of any action is a pretty common penalty that we see courts use, and that just means if a public body made a decision in executive session and went into executive session improperly, whatever decision they made based on that deliberation could be invalidated, requiring the public body to start anew with whatever that decision was. Removal from office is a pretty extreme penalty, but it does happen, it is there in the law as a potential violation or a potential penalty.
It seems, if you go back one slide,
Sure.
We can't make any decisions, and yet we're talking about property matters, personnel matters, pending court actions, collective bargaining, all those involve decisions. I'm not sure I understand how that would be applied.
Well, and anything that would require formal action, I mean, it's
Like we're gonna buy a piece of real estate, let's say. So we say, yeah, we approve it, but, but the reason it's in executive session is maybe we're buying a piece of real estate that's, we're gonna open a new campus, and we don't want people to know, that's why we have it in executive session. But now, what, we have to go out and tell everyone that decision? I mean, this isn't.
Sean, at least in my time, in every case, we've gone back into public session and conducted the vote in public session and any associated.
Well, like, not with, like, purchase, sale property, would we?
We always have, so.
And it's a very kind of fact-specific issue, and I again, if you have any questions, I'd recommend talking to your attorney if there's ever any question about whether.
Well, and that's the key point. That's why, as a committee chair or from the chair's position, we do ask Larry for input to make sure that we don't run afoul of these, even inadvertently. That's a big reason why Larry attends a lot of these things. But we've never taken a vote that I know of.
Well, I don't know necessarily taking a vote, I just know we've, talked about a lot of decisions, related to things like real estate sales, and compensation and other things.
I think the distinction that we draw is basically, you can have discussion in executive session about a topic,
Right.
but a decision that has to be made about that topic will have to take place in public session. And so therefore, what Doug has referenced about adjourning to executive session to go to public session, and then the matter is placed out in the public meeting where the issue or the question is discussed and put forward as there is a question as to whether or not the university may or may not buy a piece of property or sell a piece of property, and then that decision is made in the public session.
The distinction is general consensus and vote. I think do I understand it?
The discussion and then
Yeah.
voting in public session.
General understanding.
Is that construed as voting?
Consensus is not allowed. It's
You're not allowed to
You have
have
a discussion,
consensus.
you have a discussion, and then a decision is made in public session.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, I agree with all of that, so.
Yeah, right, well, that's
There's-
right.
I still have a question on quorum. So,
Yeah.
back to Michael's point, if there's 9 of us. So, 5 of us would be a quorum, right? In the context of how the state looks at it. But if we're making a decision about something and there's 6 of us, to his point, 4 of us vote yes, the other 2 vote no, but it's not really the 9. We're not looking at the 9, we're looking at the 6. Is that how it actually works? It seems odd to me that it would work that way.
Well, and you're talking just in the context of moving to go into executive session. Yeah, the only thing the law says is that it has to be a majority of the quorum present. So
if you have 5 people present, you have a quorum, 3 of them vote, you can go into executive session or make a decision, and it's 3 out of the 9 people on the board. I mean,
Is it the same way for?
I don't think we would necessarily do that in practice, right? But it's possible.
I guess the question is it the same thing for a public meeting? You know, if we vote in a public meeting and 5 people are there, and only 3 people vote, yes, you can pass, the 3 out of 9 members, you can pass.
Yeah. Right.
yeah, I think some of that is dictated by,
Yeah, we don't practice.
local bylaws.
Dictated by your bylaws.
But-
Right.
Yeah.
If we're making a major decision, we're probably not gonna do it when just 3 people.
Well, 5 are there, 3
Yeah,
vote for
right,
it.
yeah.
You can pass,
Yeah.
pass
You could.
something in public session.
So what I'm hearing is the vote to go into executive session does apply.
Correct.
And whatever we have in our bylaws would
Apply for
govern
public session.
what the vote would be
Mhm.
beyond voting to go into
Right.
public session.
Well, every time we've gone in, when we go into executive session, we do it according to the law, the roll call vote, determination that there's a sufficient quorum to even make the vote to go into executive session is the very first thing that we do. For that reason. I do think though, as a matter of practice, if we had 5 members at a public meeting and a significant substantial matter came up, we ought to figure out a way to get more trustees here and not vote on it just 5. And I don't know that we've ever made a major decision with just 5, but it's a matter of practice, because it sounds to me like it wouldn't be quote unquote against the law. It's so doable, but it's probably not a best practice. Probably not how it should be done.
And anything else on open meetings? So moving on to the Public Records Act, again, this is a very kind of big picture approach, but generally the law defines public record as a record kept by any public office. A record is something that exists on a fixed medium, is created or received by a public office, and it documents the activities of the office. And courts generally look at it as far as, does it document the organizations, the functions, the policies, procedures, decisions, or any other activities of the office in that regard. A lot of fixed medium, what is fixed medium? A lot of times is pretty obviously a paper, but a lot of what we do these days is electronic. And electronic medium are fixed medium, so that means that information on an email can be a public record if it otherwise satisfies the definition. And information on a personal email account can be a public record. Information that comes from a personal cell phone can be a public record. I know that this is an issue that we increasingly get questions about, because it seems like we use our phones these days to do most of everything, and a lot of people text stuff back and forth. And I know even in my office, there's a lot of confusion about, is this a public record? And it most certainly can be if you are discussing activities of the office. So same thing with a personal email account. I know just as a general practice, I try to avoid using my personal email account. Sometimes I have to, but you just have to make sure that that email gets saved within the official system, or somehow becomes part of the public body's record. So the big takeaway here is it's the information on the medium, not the medium itself. So if the information is documenting the activities of the office, it can be a public record. So in that vein, something that's purely personal is not going to document the activities of the office. So So we've got two text messages here. One asks about getting lunch. I don't know if you can read that, it's on your slide as well, but that is not gonna be most likely a public record. It's purely personal. The second text looks like it could be a public record. They're talking about something very specific related to the activities of the office. The second text is the kind of text I know that in my section we are not really supposed to send because it creates so many problems with public records issues. And one important point though is that even if a message is purely personal, like the first one, it could still end up becoming a public record based on the use. So if for some reason this text message violated an office policy and that public employee got reprimanded for that, this text message could end up in their personnel file and then it's potentially a public record. So the same is true, there's case law on employees sending emails that are inappropriate comments, and in and of themselves, the emails do not document the activities of the office, but if a public employee got reprimanded for those emails, they end up in the personnel file. Yeah.
Question. Couple of things that have come up in the course of conducting our business here. So if you have personal account emails or personal cell phone texts that pertain to institutional business, and those records are created or they exist, what kinds of records retention schedule applies to those records?
That's just going to depend on what the specific records retention schedule is for that office. So I know in my office we have records retention schedules that apply to general correspondence. We also organize our records by case matter, so it might fall under that. We also have records retention schedules that apply to what's transitory records, records that no longer have use after a certain period of time. So each office is going to keep its records organized differently. I guess it's just a matter of how that office decides to maintain them.
Second question, kind of a crossover between the two areas. So if there is a communications sent out to members of the public body, and it's a matter of the institution's business, like affairs of the institution, and there are responses or replies to that message. At what point, if those messages are exchanged among decision makers for the university, does that constitute a sealed meeting or round-robin meeting?
There's not really kind of a precise rule on that. It's going to completely depend on the nature of the deliberation going back and forth. It's going to depend on is a majority present? Is it just 2 members of a 10-person public body? Are they actually deliberating on public business, weighing back and forth? It's going to depend on all of those, and we only have White v. King as a model as far as email round robins, but I think it's safe to say that the court looked at it pretty broadly, and very easily there could be just a handful of emails that go back and forth that could, if some kind of deliberation occurs, that's then put on the record that a decision was made or there was prior deliberation, that could very easily be a meeting potentially. So there's not really a precise answer, but it's definitely something to keep in the back of your mind when emailing with colleagues, depending on the nature of what the back and forth is.
So the rule of thumb we've used is, when I send out an informational email, it's clearly a public record, like the one I sent out today. I'm gonna try to move executive session around based on availability of their guests. That's why that paragraph is at the top of it. Don't hit or pound at all, because we just want to avoid, even inadvertently, having a discussion via email that could be by the law of public meeting. That's why that statement is up there, so. I think what I heard you say, it would depend, but
Mhm.
that's why we tried to use the rule of thumb is
Mhm.
try not to hit reply all and, because you just don't even want to start a discussion even inadvertently.
Right. Right, yeah, it's, like I said, it's a very fact, and, based analysis, but, so, but I think, yeah, I think that seems right. So,
Is there a time period where these texts or emails have to be maintained?
that just depends on whatever the retention schedule applies is. Certain text messages, by their nature, sometimes text messages are transitory, which means that the usefulness of the value of those messages goes away pretty quickly. So, but it just depends on the information that's on it. So, something like.
Are you asking about retention? You said retention?
Yeah, so something like this message here on the right, where it looks like there's a specific case being discussed, then that would most likely be saved, if that was in my office, it'd probably be saved in whatever case file that is. The nice thing about doing everything kind of on the office system is that I know in my office, everything is set up through IT to be saved according to whatever schedule, so I don't have to worry about it necessarily, but that's why when you're doing kind of things on your personal email and phone, it gets a little trickier because it's incumbent upon that person to take those steps, if that makes sense. So, but every public body, every public office is gonna have different retention schedules and maintenance schedules.
Is there a way for us to get attention? Mary,
Yes.
do you think?
Yeah, it's available on the university's website under the archives, under the library. The retention schedule is there.
We can have Debbie send around the
Yeah.
notice so everybody.
Yeah,
knows
if you
what
go to
it
the
is.
A to Z directory on the main page, go to R for records management, and you click on there and bring all the schedules up.
Again, I'm not gonna go into this in too much detail, but liabilities for Public Records Act violations, there are two different options that somebody, can sue a public body, a public office for, two different court proceedings. The court can issue an order requiring the public office to produce the records. If certain circumstances apply, the court can order the public office to pay statutory damages, potentially attorney's fees. More information in the yellow book about all of these things, but just generally, these are the penalties for Public Records Act violations. We've already touched on this a little bit, managing and maintaining public records. We've already talked about that there are specific retention schedules that apply to each office that are different. But the Public Records Act does expressly require public offices to organize and maintain their public records in a manner that they can be made available for inspection or copying. So if somebody requests these public records, the expectation is that the office knows how to get them and can make them available in a reasonable amount of time. Another tricky thing with regard to text messages, as far as maintaining and preserving, is that a lot of offices or a lot of people on their phones may not have the capability to kind of keep text messages in an easy way. I know I don't on my phone. So if I were to send a work-related text message, I would have to screenshot it, send that screenshot to my email, save it that way. Is a little bit cumbersome. So just something to be aware of as far as texting. And there are liabilities for a public office for the improper disposal of public records. The office can be sued and ordered to pay a forfeiture fine of up to $1,000 for each violation of improperly disposing of records they were supposed to keep, and attorney's fees. So that basically ends the substance of what I have. I have a couple of resources. They're all in your handout here. My office's Sunshine Laws webpage, the link is at the bottom of that slide. A lot of resources on there.
Could you talk, what's not a public record? So Sean's taking notes next to it. Are his notes a public record? I don't his notes, and is that correct? And is there any line that if he crossed, they would become a public record?
It depends on what he does with them. If he is just taking notes for his own personal use, so that's down the road, he can go back and look at them to refresh his memory. They're never shared with anybody. They're probably not a public record. If they are, for some reason, shared with the public body and then, used in an official way, they could potentially become part of a public record. So it just depends on the use. But if they are kept just for personal convenience, they're used that way, he's the only one who ever uses them, probably not.
They're completely illegible.
They're worthless anyway.
Yeah. So, if it's official meeting minutes, that's a different story if somebody's taking notes for that official purpose. But yeah, just for personal convenience and that's it, most likely not a public record. So, anything else that I already talked about our Ohio Sunshine Laws Manual. The link is down here. It's searchable, which I love. It's pretty new and I use that probably every day. Further training opportunities, if anybody is interested in doing our 3-hour training, it is online now, so you don't even have to go somewhere to attend it. You can see one of us in a video doing that training. And then my office is always a resource. We get calls across the state every day and try to help people to the best we can with public records, open meetings issues, so. Anything else?
Anything further? Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah.
The next item in the board training is, I think, really interesting and important, and it's a webinar from the Associated of Governing Boards regarding revenue streams and business models for public universities. It was brought to my attention by Austin, so thank you, Austin. I went through it, and what I'd like to do, it's 45 minutes or so, watch the webinar and then have discussion. I think the board will find this interesting, particularly given where Wright State University is with its enrollment and its revenue and its need for, in a way, reinvention and rethinking our business model and how we go about creating the revenue streams we need to support our institution. And so we've talked a lot about how many of the issues that face Wright State University are not so different than the issues that face many other public universities, both inside and outside of Ohio. And this webinar addresses those issues, and I think an interesting and a thought-provoking way. So I'd like to go ahead and have Debbie start this, and when we're finished, we can open it up for discussion to see what we all take from it. So, Debbie, take it away.
Welcome to AGB Institutional Strategies complimentary webinar on creating new business models and implementing revenue diversification strategies in higher education. I'm Chris Maloney, Senior Consulting Associate for AGB Institutional Strategies, and I'm pleased to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Rick Byers, the Managing Principal of AGB Institutional Strategies. Rick has a unique combination of experience in higher education and business. He has consistently been at the forefront of industry-leading initiatives and built a successful history of leading organizations through change and significant growth. Rick is the former president of Wheeling Jesuit University and former board chair at Bullitt College, past board member at AGB, technology CEO, former senior executive at Qualcomm, and corporate officer of Trimble Navigation, a billion-dollar public company. During Rick's career, he was involved with the oversight and/or implementation of 14 different merger and acquisition transactions, including 4 nonprofit institutions. Dr. Jim Hardreiser is the Associate Managing Principal of AGB Institutional Strategies. Before his role with AGBIS, Jim served as Vice President of Enrollment Management and Student Affairs at Columbia State University, where he re-engineered recruitment, marketing, and communications efforts, leading to 2 straight years of record enrollment. As Vice President with Noel Levitt, the leading enrollment management firm, Jim worked with more than 50 colleges and universities implementing strategies for small private institutions to large research-blind institutions. Using data-informed tools to shape strategy, Jim is focused on the creation of enrollment plans to drive revenue growth. His expertise covers strategic enrollment planning, student recruitment, retention, academic advising, assessment, co-curricular programming, athletics, and campus organization. Welcome to both Rick and Jim. begin, I'll make a few brief comments about how you can make this webinar as engaging as possible. On your screens in the top right corner, you should see GoToWebinar's control panel. You can use this panel to interact with us. There are two ways you can listen to the audio, via telephone or through your electronic device. If you are listening through your computer, tablet, or your smartphone on the webinar today, all participants have been muted. If you'd like to ask us a question, please type it in the questions box and click send. We will either respond to you directly or ask your question of the presenters during the time allotted for Q&A. We will pause several times throughout today's webinar for questions, so please pose them as they occur to you. Once again, on behalf of AGB and AGB Institutional Strategies, I'd like to welcome our audience and will now turn the presentation over to Dan Jim.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Rick Byer. I'm the managing principal for AGBIS, and just a little bit about the agenda today. We're going to talk about helping define the institutional need when we think about business model transformation. This will even go into an area we call developing a prosperity gap. We're also going to talk a little bit about the macro trends impacting higher ed and how institutions can align their mission and their aspirations and their prosperity gap to these macro trends. We'll get into some details regarding strategies for growth and change and some detailed discussions around implementing change. So as Chris said, please fire away your questions and we'll stop throughout the webinar to answer them. So just a little bit about AGBIS as part of AGB, we're developing a number of different service areas for our members, from revenue growth and diversification to transformational fundraising, mergers and consolidations, costs and decrees. But most important, over the last 3 years, one of the things that we've continued to do is try to really understand and focus in on methodologies so that we don't get ahead of ourselves with regards to rushing to provide answers, but we take a little bit of time to gain consensus with everybody on the possibilities of what can be. And then we also stay with our members on implementation, which is perhaps the most distinct part of AGB. And you'll see throughout probably this presentation and for those members who are working with AGBIS is a level of creativity and innovation that we're able to bring to our members. So just kind of, thinking about, these, what I'm going to call these buzzwords and how we rethink models for higher education. You're going to hear Jim and I talk a lot about institutional will and resolve and reverting to the mean and how the operational rhythm of organizations will actually be distractors against all of these buzzwords. And while we have a lot of people talking about innovation and how do you make an impact and rethinking the model, talking about it and doing it is significantly different. And I think that's where when we talk about implementation of how we'll help our members be able to stay focused, because the difference between a strategy and a successful strategy is how you execute and how you operationally execute. And even you can take a very average plan with great operational execution and be much farther ahead with compared to a great strategy and poor execution. So Jim, I would like to have you maybe start with some of the business model challenges, if you could.
Great, and good afternoon and good morning to a couple of you. Great to be with you all today. Thanks for the opportunity to be with us. And Rick mentions the business model being challenged. And certainly on this slide, we see that the competitive landscape is changing greatly. We know that this is impacting many institutions to figure out how to match revenues versus expenses and where is the margin. And we certainly know that without margin, there is no mission. And so just as a reminder for those of you, revenue minus expenses means that there should be something left over. And that left over, we're seeing that continue to shrink, challenging the business model, but really rethinking, needing schools to rethink about how will they creatively or innovatively impact their futures. And so we want to start out with asking you on the next slide, what is preventing you from achieving your goals? What is it that is causing you a challenge, what is causing you an opportunity to maybe throughout this webinar to think about something that you could be doing differently, or think about ways in which you might be aligning with some macro trends. Every school we visit, there are some great things going on. Every school we visit, we're always mindfully aware of where we see places where accountability or will or a lack of understanding of where trends are moving to just are rarely getting an institution moving forward. Because the changes that we're seeing, as is highlighted on the next slide, is nothing, there are lots of places as we think of the situational assessment of higher education where it is no different. We are not immune from the changes that we're seeing through many industries in many places. This is not surprising or new, yet higher education continues to think that we are immune from some of these things. And we know that that really is just not the case. Yet Moody's and others are continuing to downgrade our financial sustainability and really concerned that we are not preparing for that. Articles were out just again last week about is higher education living in a bubble, and that bubble was attached to the amount of loan debt that we're seeing students continually increase, with one report showing $37,000 in average student debt upon graduation. So, will the market continue to do that? And on the next slide, we look at higher education as a market in general. It has continued to contract. We've gone from about 21 million to latest figures even showing slightly below 18 million, 17.9 million students. In one report I saw, another reporting the 18 million. But the market is contracting. And so if we continue to do our same practices, why do we think that those are going to do that? And surprisingly, 34% of institutions met their enrollment targets for this past fall. And so this major shift that is occurring as we look at the demographics and the demographic changes. This is nothing new. This is a chart that goes out to 2031. And so for some of you, you used to be in the red or the salmon color, knowing that you were going to have decreasing demographics. Now there are some of you that as we project out to 2031, high school graduates will start to increase again. But we know the competition for these students, the makeup, the interest types of these students are going to continue to just continue to change. And I mentioned student debt before, and we see how much of that debt is currently in existence. To think that $1.5 trillion is our student debt total today, that's double all credit card debt in the United States, and none of this includes the parent debt. And we're beginning to see new figures that are showing parent debt growing from $10,000 to $20,000 per average student. And while the media and others have portrayed some of this debt in the not-for-profit sector, or in the for-profit sector, we certainly have seen much of that really being consumed in the not-for-profit sector, leading to decreased net tuition revenue. And so every institution that we work with, for the most part, is seeing a decrease in that net tuition revenue, and not looking at the realities around median household income. So if we look all across the country, you see that household income has barely grown or increased, and despite two latest year reports that say the revenues, the household income has increased, that proportionally has increased maybe 2 or 2.5% off of that 56,000. When we compare that to the cost of higher education, you begin to see where those gaps. So affordability, access, opportunity is going to continue to be a big challenge. Rick, maybe you want to talk about some of the consumer changes that we're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. There are a number of what I'll call systemic issues that the industry as a whole is facing. So we'll talk a little bit about the demographic shifts in terms of high school graduates. And we talked a little bit about how the whole market in general has contracted over the last 6 years. But some of the additional, when you look at these changing consumer behaviors, especially when prices are this high, that getting a job becomes still the #1 issue for students. And being a liberal arts grad, I know that's critically important to be prepared for a job that may not even exist. or in an industry that it doesn't exist yet. But at the same time, with today's pricing levels, price and value become tremendously important. The student loan issue, as Jim said, student loans are for many consumers now are no longer considered financial aid. It's really the absolute norm within our industry is that, well, we're going to get you our student aid and we're going to get you a Stafford loan. What's happening, the consumers are becoming a lot more astute in realizing that student loan debt is not expungible under bankruptcy laws, so that student debt remains with them forever and ever until they get that paid back. No doubt applied learning it remains important, will probably continue to always be important, but kind of that lower, those lower two boxes, as institutions are trying to lower the cost, those costs aren't necessarily translating into lower consumer prices. So we have, without a doubt, a lot of systemic issues going on in higher education. When we talk a little bit about this really adds to the systemic issues, what I'll call slow operating rhythms of the industry. No matter what industry you're in or what company you're in or organization you're in, every organization has an operating rhythm, kind of the way things are done. And when we take a look at the operating rhythms inside higher education, particularly around a campus-based delivery model, we see tremendous amount of self-inflicted wounds, particularly operating procedures or policies that no longer align to the market and absolutely prevents revenue growth. And in terms of processing applications or the speed and what I'll call speed and service is still relatively new to our industry. And particularly what I'm going to call old policies that just no longer serve the market. Decisions we see really, although AGB is really prides itself on talking about best practices in governance and shared governance, I think the industry has also taken shared governance to a level of excess where they have confused operating decisions and accountability with shared governance, and that there has to be a lot more individual accountability with department leads or the vice president or wherever, where decisions could take an hour, might take weeks and months because of the collaborative operating rhythm that has been developed, and that is impacting revenue. But all in all, we see consistently that institutional will and resolve will be in shorter supply than financial resources, and we see this continuously. Not throughout the entire organization, but in pockets of every organization that we work with. We will see things start to go forward, and the first time that there's any kind of a struggle or constraint, there will be a natural revert to the mean and try to go back to the way things were. So we'll touch base on this again throughout the webinar.
Thanks, Rick and Jim. I do have a couple of questions here. I think this would be a good spot to have you guys address them. The first question from someone in our audience today is, if you could give an example of another type of self-inflicted wound or something that you see in your work of murder.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to call old policies that no longer align in the market. Today, as you start getting into the macro trends, and we'll show that 75% of all students will attend 2 or more colleges before they graduate. So when you start looking at this trend, that's not like today, this is a big macro trend. It really means that 75% of the market is a transfer market. And so our paradigms are around, the freshman market, but institutions need to be thinking about if your junior class as larger or larger than your freshman class. Here's where an example where old operating rhythms are self-inflicted wounds. Over the past 10 to 20 years, core curriculum requirements have gone up at institutions, and under the guidelines, while we want to provide this holistic education and develop the whole student, which I'm 100% in favor of, But I asked myself, well, wow, 20 years ago, wasn't that same institution producing whole students and great students? But you look at what core curriculum requirements were 20 years ago. They were far less than they are today in general, as a general statement. And this really becomes part of what I'm just call self-preservation. Number 9, you put a class here, a class there. What that then means is when an institution then looks at the transfer market, they basically become non-competitive, because transfer students want to know how many credits we're going to transfer, how long is it going to take me to graduate, and they don't want to be taking added core curriculum or taking beyond the credits that are required to actually graduate from an institution. So right there is right there on core and policies that just don't align to the market have over time become self-inflicted.
I would add a flip to that, which is at the end of the student's experience, I am still surprised by how many institutions have your last 30 credits must be taken at the home institution or the graduating institution in order to complete the degree. Hundreds of you still have that, thousands of you still have that policy. And yet when you think about student completion, student success, what is so distinctive about those last 30 credits? A student missed a general education class, as Rick mentioned, or they missed something else, and life happened for them that they couldn't complete their degree. They've got 6 or 9 credits. It amazes me how many institutions still have policies on the books that are focused on, that were potentially well-intended at one time, that really are hurting a student get and complete their degree because of some flexibility that needs to be inserted into the operation of the institution, knowing that students can take courses online, and knowing that students can take courses at community colleges to finish up those last 9, or potentially through you all. And I'm also hearing about more schools going back to policies of if you're a full-time residential student, you can't be in the online program. Well, that's again a paradigm shift, that it shouldn't matter where the student's at. Will allow them to take credit anywhere that you offer them. Thank you, Rick and Jim. I do have another question that also fits in here, I think, pretty well, which is how do we convince our university, our college, the institution that we're working at, that we're in a crisis without creating a panic among other staff or.
Yeah, that's a good question, Chris. I would underscore the word continuous communication. You just can't have a one and done communication that tries to accomplish everything and get points across, because people are sometimes selective listening. But I think regular plenary sessions, you can have plenary sessions on the situational assessment of higher education as a general. You can have plenary sessions on the macro trends shaping higher education. You can then also have plenary sessions on how's the institution doing today, and where's our plan to move forward. But this can be accomplished, but it takes continuous communications, definitely segmenting different parts of the organization, particularly with faculty and different parts of the organization. Key thought leaders, educating key thought leaders in the organization who can gain context and understanding. You can do so many things without creating that crisis mode. And it's when everybody tries to get everything across in one meeting is where the term crisis kind of starts infiltrating. And then regular communications, because if you don't communicate, then people will communicate for you.
I'd add, where does your 5-year modeling come into place? Where are you showing those assumptions in those models? So as you project out, everybody wants a salary increase. We know benefits potentially are going to go up. We know that there's other physical plant requirements that need to be adhered to. That I think we need to spell out what is the plan, how are we saving for that plan, and what are the cost assumptions that we're putting into place, and how does that help us either align to some of the macro trends we're going to talk about next, or know that we need to be an institution making some solid changes to grow revenue in strategic areas to support those operating activities that we want to continue to grow. Rick, and thank you, Jim.
So taking a look at some governance measures. So the challenges go, beyond just the president and the cabinet, his or her cabinet, but the boards are undergoing change as well. We see a lot of some trends. We see a trend of boards getting smaller. We definitely think board leadership is critical to producing strategic thinking, to create energy for the president and his or her cabinet, versus what I'll call withdrawing energy. Very, very crucial. We still see too many boards, that'll have pockets of nostalgia that prevents the board as a whole from thinking strategic. And this is an area where AGB also helps address. But when you have a large board that needs to act as a collective body, that's a really serious issue. The trend is to reduce the size of boards so that it can be nimble and provide energy to the president and the cabinet. And so big boards are also hindering the strategic ability for institutions to move forward. Jim, why don't you take macro trends?
Sure. So as we start looking at some of these macro trends, these are, we could spend the next 2 hours talking to you about trends that we're seeing. So we just want to highlight for you a couple of those trends that we're seeing. And the first one is what Rick mentioned around transfer students. But asking yourself the question, why is your junior class not as large as your freshman class? If you look at the millions of students enrolled in community colleges, while certainly there is a segment within them that is getting a 2-year degree, when you drill down on National Clearinghouse data and what students report as their degree intention, literally millions of students are reporting that they are enrolling with the aspiration to complete a bachelor's degree or higher. And so what are you doing to really actively create pathways, systems, processes to be recruiting more and more transfer students? How are those articulation agreements working at your institutions? And how are they really working much more seamlessly than you probably think? So many people will say, oh yeah, we've got all those things, and then when we drill down further, we learn that indeed it takes the student weeks to hear back how many classes are going to need to graduate. It takes weeks to hear how this pathway of their programs are going to align up with yours. With the technology that we have at our fingertips today, there's just no reason that we're not really creating something that is much more seamless and creating pathways for our students as we grow. So transfers, imagine what your revenue cycle would look like, and imagine what your campus community would be like to have as many freshmen coming in as you have transfers every year. So next we look at e-technology and e-migration. I think for many institutions we hear about people hoping that when the nonprofits, or the for-profits rather, were starting to decrease, or some of them going out of business, that the trend for e-technology was going to lessen or go away. Well, of course we've learned that couldn't be anything farther from the truth. We've got 7-ish million students enrolled in online, either exclusively or taking some courses online. And this is a trend that we just continue to see happen. So we know that many of you strategically have been thinking through what's your role in online, how will you manage that, what place will it have. But certainly when we think about the learning experience, how we integrate in online learning is critical to how we think about that. And Rick, maybe you want to give a couple of comparisons.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If you kind of go to the next slide, one of the things I was asked by an institution about thinking about what was going to happen over the next 20 years. I think all you have to do is ask yourself, will technology play a increasing role or decreasing role over the next, just say, 3 to 5 years? Forget about 10 or 20. And if you think that technology is going to play a smaller role than today, I really would suggest that you take a look at your overall strategy. But I went back to try to find when higher education was kind of getting into what I want to call the digital era, which I looked at and came up with an answer about 2002, which was about 16 years ago. And I found this quote from an MIT director in 1995 that was talking about soon we'll be buying newspapers and books right over the internet. And yet the Newsweek editor is saying, you know, right, how come my local mall does more business in an afternoon than the entire internet handles in a month? That was about 22 years ago. And so when I looked at what was 22 years, fast forward off of 2002, that would be about 2024, which is about 6 years from now, which is really not that long. If you go to the next slide, I then was looking at what happened to brick and mortar education. And so we'll get to that, but when we look at digital learning in itself, there's an increased number of institutions moving in to online and digital. And I would say that a couple of things. This is not a matter of if, but how an institution participates. So if an institution is saying, no, we're not going to go into this, I would really say there's going to be some fundamental issues, unless you are such a unique positioned and very, very well-financed institution with billions of dollars in endowment. But even those institutions are well into digital today. But the key is going to be how you scale. The big are going to get bigger. And so what we do see is many institutions who have launched online programs have actually either hit a plateau or started to decline. There's a number of reasons for that to happen. And one of them is we see is that a lot of operating policies and procedures, you get up to a certain level, but the institution isn't scaling, doesn't know how to scale from marketing and lead generation, speed and service. And then there's all the issue about people, on how do you attract and keep, technically competent people. So there's a lot of struggles in this area. And this is a really good example where when you get the struggles that institutions or organizations will say, well, we're going to put that aside. And this is an area that is going to take a lot of insight, institutional will, and context about where you play in what I'll call digital learning. And so, and in fact, my one last, I don't think we have that slide on here, but last year in the brick and mortar retail market, more than 6,500 retail stores, brick and mortar retail stores closed just in 2017. And so the impact on e-commerce on brick and mortar retail institutions is substantial and will continue to. And so when Jim was talking earlier about history and other industries and higher education, well, we're not like that, we're different. We should know from history that we can look to history for so many similarities. And if we think e-commerce is not going to have e-commerce is going to have a major impact on higher education. So the question is, what is that going to do to brick and mortar, campus-based delivery? So when you start looking at institutions, the adult market is typically driven more by technology, and serving that adult market is vastly different, requires different policies, different enrollment, student services, and alike. And it's vastly bigger than the traditional markets of high school students. Chris, moving on.
Hi, sir.
Yeah. And then when you take a look at certificates and credentials, are going to become a very, very and will become a really important part of learning stackable credentials, non-degree graduate professional certificates. And it's really going to be driven by students, the adults. We already see a decline in MBA programs. Adults are moving towards certificates. They're faster, they're lower cost, and they align with applied learning. And so you're going to see that potentially impact even more over the next few years, but it gives a great opportunity for institutions to say, maybe we should go into that. And instead of going into pure adult degree completion, maybe we should be going into this area as part of our digital strategy. So there's a lot of different ways to approach what I'll call digital in different market segments. And then you'll see a lot of new entrants coming in with content, course content, and the ability to offer course content at the, this is the old days when you had, in the music industry, when you had to own the record studio to produce a record. And no longer do you have to be the college to be able to produce learning. And so you're going to have more and more third parties and new entrants come to the market with learning solutions. And it'll have an impact. So how it plays, and you're going to see the corporations, major corporations, having a big say in that. And definitely great opportunities. These are not threats. It could be wonderful opportunities for institutions who look at this major trend in perspective of where they want to go. Boot camps, you're seeing some consolidation take place right now, but STEM learning and coding, software engineering continues to be a big growing segment of the marketplace. There's a number of institutions that have already partnered with coding camps, and this really a really great example of what I'll call applied learning, and coupled with say a liberal arts degree could be very, very powerful. So
and Rick, one of the things I like to be asking campuses is if coding boot camps aren't for you, which is great, what is your next boot camp? What is your boot camp concept, your boot camp idea? What's something that is going to grow your revenues and have you think outside of the box in ways to service your students so that they're going to be prepared for what is it that's next? So a lot of times we hear places say, oh yeah, that's not really us, that's not really who we are. Well, then what's distinctive? What's distinctive about you that you could be packaging and delivering in a way that is exactly like they've been doing in these boot camps, but that is distinctly unique to you and focused on revenue generation. And I think when you look at your mission, the work that you do, the distinctive ways in which you serve, you certainly have some real opportunities to think about how you might do that and play a role differently compared to other boot camps, in a boot camp construct about how to do that.
yeah, Jim, that's a really good point. I think that when you look back through some of the things we've been talking about, are opportunities when you think about a model, say a transformational business model, it really is focused around diversification of learning and revenue growth in diversification. So, no longer living and dying on the fall freshman class. Even though campus based, the campus might be the absolute core and reason for the existence, which is wonderful. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's all you should focus on. In fact, successful models will have a significant emphasis on a comprehensive series of program offerings, which what I'll think about strategic building blocks. And we help our members think about, what are the 3 to 6 strategic building blocks other than what you have today, or to be able to grow that will help the diversification, that will create added margins so that you can invest back into salaries, that you can invest back into student services and academic support and additional program development. And so it's this, if it's not a coding boot camp, it's something else. And it's usually never one silver bullet. There's usually multiple things that an institution can do that aligns really well with their mission, but also has to align with their aspirations and their financial needs going forward.
Absolutely, and I think as we look at the next slide, this slide highlights for folks some of the changing majors and some of the new opportunities that come from jobs of the future. As you look at many of these jobs, this is not one major, this is not one degree. This is, and some of them certainly are, but this is really about beginning to think much more interdisciplinarily, much more creatively about how do we bring current content together and how do we prepare learners for a different type of jobs of the future. If you think about robotics or cybersecurity, each of those kind of get framed within a school of engineering, or cybersecurity might be in a variety of different options. But when you drill down into them, what the robotics people need are creative writers, they need engineers, they need scientists, they need change supply managers, they need all kinds of things to be able to make that work in a most efficient way. How do we begin to shift our organizations to think about ways that align with jobs in the future, but also operating rhythms that align more systemically from a systems perspective, and how do we use integration of technology?
And one more point, Jim, for people is not to be confused that this has to be a major. You don't have to have a major, major in computer game design. All you have to do, you can have certificates, you can have concentrations, and all different types of other areas. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that that's the type of thinking, or when you think of the next slide about new technologies, and certainly folks have been looking at the Georgia state examples of recent weeks and the ways that they have used a whole variety of technologies to increase their retention rates, increase student satisfaction, increase the outcomes of degrees. I mean, all of these different examples are opportunities for institutions to think about where does cost reduction opportunities that lie, where do we increase student experience, student services, the ways we're engaging with students, and how do we help answer their questions or move to a place where students are really in the center of the equation here and using technology to help service them in more efficient and quicker ways. And last, we conclude some of the trends with partnerships. So certainly, there are lots of opportunities, and Rick's done quite a bit of work around partnership opportunities. And this slide just shows you a few of the institutions that have either merged or are partnering together. But certainly, we see partnership opportunities as, again, another building block that might be beneficial for you to think about where are your assets at and resources, and how do those align together. And Rick, maybe you've got an example or two you want to give as well around partnerships or mergers and focusing on your strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things. This is going to be an area on mergers and consolidations that is going to be increasing at a faster rate than we've seen in the past. And we have usually a quarterly webinar on mergers and consolidations. And I talk about the sell side, the buy side. Not that colleges are bought and sold, but the sell side, meaning maybe a weaker institution looking for a home, and a buy side are the stronger institutions that may need to think about what might we want to do in the area of consolidation to help build and improve our competitive position, expand our programming. And a couple of key points, there are going to be a lot more sellers than buyers. On the sell side, getting prepared in advance. This is the most difficult thing for institutions to do, because what is the likelihood is there will be many, many hard closures. And that this is where boards really fail to take some steps back and look at what will go into a prosperity gap and where you're at, where you need to be, and saying, do we have the ability to get there, and do we have the confidence or an ability to execute our plans, or maybe we should be looking at some strategic alternatives. And it takes a good year to be able to do a transaction. And so for those institutions who try to start, in the summer when they're out of cash, it's going to be a tough road. But there's some really great opportunities out there, and the same thing on the buy side. And moving on, I think one of the things that
Before we move on, to interrupt you guys for a second. We just covered a lot of macro trends, and I have a question here from the audience asking which macro trend or which macro trends you think are easiest to address.
Well, any one of them is going to require instant will and resolve. So on one hand, transfer students should be the easiest thing to do because it's immediate revenue. and for institutions to say, like, wow, we need revenue like right now. And so today is June. I would just ask that the EF transfer students are still applying, waiting. There's opportunities for them, but the operational rhythms consistently are slow. So that is an area that would be tremendous to be able to do just right here for him. Jim, any other thoughts?
Yeah, mine would be focused around thinking about the jobs of the future and what majors do you currently offer and how can you combine those in creative ways to be aligned with job trends. Much of that content has already been built and created for you, but I'm not watching schools connect the dots for the students in seamless ways, and I think that that's a really easy opportunity for institutions to think about its curriculum you already have, already in place and ready to go, bring it together for the student in a really user-friendly way. Great, thank you guys. So moving on to some of those, so as we think about those growth, those are a few of the trends, a few of the opportunities, and we want to think about where are some strategies for growth, change, and prosperity for you all. And as we look at the next slide, we think about where is your prosperity gap. When you think about your quantitative situational assessment for your institution, where are your cash flows, your operational gaps, your infrastructure gaps, where do those exist? And how can you really focus on changing those operating rhythms that Rick talked about, and how many dollars do you really need for growth to cover those dollars? I think Rick's got some great examples of, go ahead.
Yeah, too many times, what you hear so often is, well, we need more enrollment, need more fundraising, and that no longer is the answer. That's a macro answer at 100,000 view. If you go on to the next slide, Chris, one of the things, quantifying where you're at, is that when we take a look at institutions who are underfunding, say, student life, or underfunding academic support, or not paying people at where the competitive wages are, or not spending enough on marketing, and not reinvesting into the institution. So this is just an example of an institution with a $600 million budget. We've done prosperity gaps with $30 and $40 million budgets. But when we look at particularly the gap, it usually is significantly larger on the operating side, where everybody's been getting used to, let's do more with less. But what happens over about a 5 to 7 year period, it creates this, the dullness. It creates a way that you can't really scale your organization and really be prosperous. So what happens is in plans moving forward, usually we'll see that reinvestment or that quality of earnings has not really been addressed. And there's no amount of cutting that can then address the long-term sustainable model to get to prosperity. So just in this model was $150 million of revenue growth that we needed to, over a 5 to 7 year period, that we needed to work on developing. But we've done it, prosperity gaps for institutions, $20 million of size, and we're a $7 to $10 million gap. We would translate that into maybe a $25 million top line revenue, and so that means that you really have to think about how do you grow and diversify your revenue. So the prosperity gap is really important, so that you really understand, and the board understands, where is the delta between your current performance and if you were a prosperous institution today, what you might look like. And then that helps you determine, well, maybe we should build these, focus in on developing some strategic building blocks. Or maybe we should do a build affiliate buy strategy. Or maybe we don't have the ability to execute and really ever get there. Maybe we should think about a long-term strategic partner. So every institution is different, but doing this prosperity gap, this usually is done within the first 30 days of our assignment. And this is an earlier, a question about how to get people to, understand. Doing this prosperity gap is really important to help gain consensus on where you're at, so that when you have people saying, well, why are we growing? Why do we have to grow? Well, we have to grow to meet this gap and to become prosperous in the future. And people will understand that, but it does take a lot of communications. Next slide, Chris.
So this gives us an example, Rick, of exactly those building blocks you were talking about, and ways in which we look strategically at 5 initiatives to be able to say and map out, so that as you're trying to identify the gap above, here's the way that we're going to fill the gap. So that gap on the slide above was $1.5 million and $3 million, and you needed $15 million of growth over the course of the next 5 to 7 years. You've got to begin to think about initiatives where is revenues, additional revenues come from, where are those additional expenses to support that, and where is the margin opportunities. And certainly if you look at Initiative 5 as an example, you'll see that there's minimal margin opportunities at the beginning, because you're building in infrastructure, you're building up support. But then as you move forward, you've got $500,000. And in this example of this institution, this was a really conservative example versus Initiative 3, where there was certainly multiple opportunities for the institution to steadily grow their revenues by investing into the infrastructure and still having significant margins. So that within 3 years out, this initiative is generating almost $4 million in net revenues after expenses. And so these are the types of models that you need to be building and thinking about as you work towards your future state. And how are you doing that? Focusing on places where there is revenue minus those expenses. Too often we see institutions that are putting together programs that have revenue and the expenses are neutralizing, and there is no additional margin. We really believe that you've got to start really focusing on these net margin contributions to really be rebuilding the infrastructure that you need to be successful. So on the next slide, we show you just kind of a highlight of some of the things that we talked about, and ask you the question about, here are some growth opportunities, and on the left-hand side, you see some of those growth opportunities, and here are the challenges. And on the next slide, we ask you the question, where do you want to be? Where do you want to use creativity and innovation when you know that it's required? So is it going to be through revenue diversification? Is it going to be through new programs? Is it going to be through blended delivery services? What will it be, and how will you align your markets, your efforts, your programs to do that? And certainly we work with institutions to make that happen, but for each institution, you really need to be asking, how will you be responding to which pieces of the market, and where will you be responding with creativity and innovation to work through that institutional will and those opportunities that are needed for the future. So Rick, I don't know if you want to talk about it, you want me to continue to talk about implementing things?
Yeah, we'll just, talk a little bit about, institutional will and change. Chris, I don't know if we have a follow-up slide on that. So one of the things that we work with our members on is that we're going through a particular case study. Let's just say if it is revenue growth and diversification as part of helping transform the business model. We do like picking a target going into the project. So we'll usually work with the president and his or her team, and sometimes the board, about picking a target. If it's, let's just say it's a $70 million operating budget, and we might pick a 10 or $12 million margin target. Well, that might represent $25 to $35 million of top line revenue. So when we start going into the project, we'll have some goals in mind. And the diagnostics part that talks about situational assessment, it really helps bring all of the teams together. It brings the teams together about what we're trying to accomplish collectively, and we are able to address the operating rhythms and take about a month, do the prosperity gap, And it really is amazing of how a lot of consensus can be built about where we're at and where we then need to go. And then as you get into the exploration, and there's never a silver bullet. There's always 4 to 6 opportunities, and you really need to be able to have multiple opportunities that actually exceed your targets, because you can't rely on perfect execution. And then you want to be able to model those out over a 3 to 5 year period of time. You'll need to know, are there investments that you need to make? And usually there are. And what are the priorities? And we also talk about risks and operational execution. This is where institutional will starts to come into play. Let's just say if it was a transfer market and addressing old policies, or Jim's talking about jobs of the future. Oftentimes people will start to say, well, no, we need an academic major to do that. We would never make that a concentration, or we'd never consider taking on external content. So this is where you'll start to see the revert to the mean start to take place. And but we have to be able to put risks into the plan and identify. We've had institutions say, look, we're going to add more transfer counselors. And we said, look, that's a great idea, but don't do that until you can address the root cause of the problem, which is your core curriculum and your speed and processing of your transfer applications. You can get that in order or have a plan, then you can start to move those investments forward. And then when you get into implementation, again, institutional will and resolve will be greatly tested here. And it's all about a bias towards action. And I think this is probably even our greatest service that AGBIS can do for its members, is helping you and staying with you, so that when a decision needs to be made, and there will be inevitably decisions that don't want to be made, or another committee that needs to be launched to look at it, that we're there to help you, to say, no, you don't need another committee, you just need to make the decision and move forward. And so that's really, I think, a great service that we can help with our members. So when you take this all, it's not just about developing a strategy, it's about developing a comprehensive diversification model. And it's about how you can model that and then feed that ultimate financial contribution back into core, and that it can meet your prosperity gap, and that you can have a chance to execute operationally in a manner that can be successful. And that's kind of where we're on the implementation side are so helpful. Jim, let me turn it back over to you.
Chris, how about, I know we're about at time, any last question? No, Jim, we don't have any other questions from the audience except one, which I think would be good to end on. This individual is looking for some tips on how they can get their campus to start acting, or maybe they're looking for some strategies from you on what you've done at the schools you've worked with to get some action going. Yeah, well, certainly Rick mentioned the bias towards action, and one of the places where we've seen some good successes is identifying some revenue segment champions who are really working to take the lead with accountability, given resources, to be able to move some smaller initiatives forward. That might be not be enough to really move at the amount that you need to, but there's ways to begin to cut through this, or to really think about. So that's one idea. Another idea is really thinking about, as you think about your strategic plan, your strategic priorities, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 that are really going to link revenue growth with enhanced diversification for your institution? And rather than having, we watch a lot of schools with a laundry list of strategic priorities, and frankly, most of them are too many. There are too many places that the institution is focused, and it is not, and then it leads to a culture of low accountability or low outcome or return on that investment. So where are the places where you can look more strategically, align those resources, and stay focused on those? And it may lead to less things done, but more things done far more effectively with far greater results. Rick, I don't know if you'd add something to that.
No, Jim, I think you said it all, and I think if we just go on to our last slide, and well, if anybody has any questions or wants to in touch with myself.
So thanks for your patience. What I'd like to do is just take a couple minute break, because we've been sitting here for a while. But just a couple minutes break and come back and discuss what we saw in that. When I first saw that, the thought that came to mind is this is the Wright State University case study. It wasn't, but that's what came to my mind. So let's just take a couple of minutes for those who need a bio break or whatever it is. We'll come back together as quickly as we can, and we'll just have an open discussion regarding that webinar.
Hike from the number of the hills right down there. I actually stayed over at it's been a while since I
Wasatch Crest Trail, right above, starts above Deer Valley, right above the range, so we literally looking this way down the road, that way down. Little Cottonwood Canyon.
You can see the lake.
I don't even think that's the nation's top trout fish.
Services, that's, the whole thing is to try and bring it up to so.
That's the best. Well, we were surprised when we bought the place out there. We were there staying all summer. My wife.
So, I see.
But you may want to make sure your air conditioning's on set.
Okay. Otherwise,
Otherwise, you wouldn't be here typing that up. You don't have air. No university has air conditioning because the weather is so pleasant. I mean, it can get hot, but there's great humidity. It's 2 or 3 days of the year. Like here, we have 2 or 3 really pleasant days. The rest of them are hot.
Here, why don't I bring this here and you guys can sit?
I was waiting for Michael and Bruce to get back. I'm sure they'll be back any second.
Appreciate your speaking to us, sir.
And I'm gonna try to engage in a little bit of open discussion about what we just saw. As I said, to me, in a way, it's the Wright State University story, and it frames our challenge. And while the last 2 years or so have been quite difficult for all kinds of reasons, it's our board's obligation to turn it around so the next 2 or 3 years aren't really as difficult. And I think that webinar really presents a bit of a roadmap. So I invited David and Craig in here as we have this discussion. I would really like to hear what my fellow trustees thought, and not just what you thought, but what do you think you'd like to see as board members of our administration, Cheryl and her team, and our strategic planning group, in terms of what you just saw. To me, it was incredibly relevant, but that's just me. So right now I have 2 trustees in here. So.
Well, let me start, Doug. You know, we talked a lot about enrollment retention, and I think there were some things in there that should be of interest to us as we're thinking broader about, you know, how do we get the right students and what is the right student, and how do you describe that? Is it through the virtual digital means? Is it brick and mortar means? What's the right student? How do you attract them? I was fascinated with the statistics of 75% transfer. You know, I thought it would be just the other way, a 25% transfer and 75%, you know, came in the door and walked out with a degree 4 to 5 years later. Really fascinating, because that needs to be factored in. You know, when we think about enrollment and retention and capturing the transfer student, and also the adult student. You know, how do we capture those people that are more inclined for a digital degree or digital certification? Because you know, it's easy to put yourself in that role when you're hearing this, you're going, yeah, that's something I could do. You know, not go back to school for 4 years, but get a certification and a capability. And if you look at that laundry list of where jobs are necessary, a lot of those are certifications. You know, building on top of the degree already has. So a lot of really good ideas in here. So when we kick off our enrollment discussions and retention, that almost might be a, let's watch this one more time, because this is going to cause you to think differently.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think they went into a lot of different opportunities for growth, and obviously Jim and Morton mentioned a lot of them, but this transfer, more online stuff, certification, the transfer students. And you know, overall the trend is negative. So what we're seeing is, you know, very convinced that not every institution is the average, right? Very few of them are, and some of them are growing, and we could be one of those that's growing, right? And there are lots of opportunities out there for us to take advantage of to actually grow this business. So I want to say, geez, we're a victim of the economy here, we're a victim of what's going on in public education. I say, you know what, we're a fighter, we're gonna go out there, we're gonna define who we are through the strategic planning process, and then we are gonna go out there and we're gonna grow. We're gonna win customers and we're gonna become bigger and stronger.
Spoken like a true businessman. You know, but some of us involved with mergers and acquisitions, I thought it was really intriguing. Seller versus buyer. This is gonna happen in I think, in the educational ecosystem. There are going to be mergers and acquisitions. I know Bruce has brought it up in the past. Do we need to be a seller, a buyer, or are we gonna be a complacent, spectator? So I don't think you can be a complacent spectator. I think you're gonna have to be thinking strategically about how are we positioned? Are we gonna grow and be the buyer, or are we going to be looking for the right partnership in the merger? Something to think about.
If you maintain, you lose.
Spin.
Yeah, there's no standards.
The thing that stuck out to me, so this is the second time I've seen it, was this simple question: do we have the institutional will to do some of the things that it suggested? Because there sometimes could be considered a little bit out of the box for higher education in general. Austin, you're the one that sent me an email, so you need to look at this. And so what were your thoughts when you saw it the first time?
I think there's two other webinars around the same topic, and I would encourage the other trustees to look into those. They're on HEGB's website. And it really showed a holistic picture. I followed every single one. I think the main things that I got out of it and what I would expect from a strategic plan would be, the old policies and removing those self-inflicting wounds that we have. I think we're getting there, but I would really like to see that. And then the speed and service aspect. So if we can capture those students quicker, they're more likely to just say yes and stay where they are. So I think we need to be looking at that and always keeping that in mind. I loved the webinar. I thought it was, a case study on Wright State University, and it was kind of surreal to see it portrayed in that way. And I think it's very valuable to have the board members trained in that area. So.
Bruce, you and I've had some discussions. I thought when I watched this, I was listening to you in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's pretty similar, so, it's probably not different than what many universities are thinking about, I would assume, given that enrollment and revenue generation is declining, across many of them. So, critiquing it a little bit like we talked about in your office on targeting for specific areas of need in our region, and not broad brushing it. I think it'd be more targeted would be probably a better approach, rather than trying to be all things to all people.
Right.
Right. And we know there's need here, in the 6 or 9 county area that we service, so.
So Bruce, if we were targeting, where would you target?
From an industry perspective?
Yes.
I would target manufacturing, information technology, healthcare would be primary ones I'd focus on first, because and manufacturing you should include logistics and supply chain because of materials management, because we have such a big opportunity here for companies that utilize that. Those are where most of the people involved in workforce development in the region are focused on, right? So those are 1 or 2 year certificate programs, 2-year associate degree programs, things like that. And it doesn't mean you can't go on and get a full, supply chain degree like we have here at Wright State, but targeting people who are interested in those areas and can't afford much more than that on the interim basis until they start working, and targeting those that are between 20 and 40 years of age that work in those environments already, but have not been able to obtain even a certificate or an associate's degree because they just haven't had the opportunity to do that. So I think it's be best in our occasion if we can give them an opportunity and make it attractive for them.
Right.
So.
Another, Michael, I'll get to you in a second. Another thing that struck me with a little bit of cringe was at the end, most institutions do this. What they should do is this. I saw a lot of us in this is what most institutions do,
So
and
the committee,
a little
yeah.
less in the other side. But no, the point I was gonna make is, it seemed like the webinar was advocating, you need to choose some small number, I don't know, 3, 5 kind of initiatives that you're gonna invest in, because they all won't work, but they all need to be targeted, they all need to be vetted, and the whole 5-year prosperity gap. And so I'm hoping that we have the will to be a little bit experimental in terms of maybe we pick 3 that we just sound really good at, and 1 that's kind of out. You know, that might be the one that hits the home run in the long term, I don't know. Michael, what were your thoughts?
There are a couple things, and I appreciate what Bruce said about technology and healthcare. I think those are key to our region and continually changing and expanding. I think that if it's my understanding, in our School of Nursing, there's actually a waiting list. And when I hear waiting list, I think, well, there's more demand than we have supply, and that's an area for potential expansion.
Yeah.
If we can do that when we've got a waiting list to get in. Second thing is that, you know, in one of the earlier slides, there were various initiatives that they listed that are very consistent with the kinds of things we could offer in terms of cyber and, you know, certificates and things like that, not necessarily degrees. We happen to be in a region that has a tremendous demand for those kinds of skills from a certificate program, I think, and for people to have continuing education, not necessarily associated with a degree. I think there's a real need in our region for that, and that's definitely an area that we should look at.
Right. Anuj?
I agree with what Michael's saying. I mean, I think that particularly amongst my area, particularly because it's healthcare, but there's opportunities in whether it's nursing school or other areas where there's a huge demand, and there are corporate partners that are willing to partner with us to even fund the cost of education and or to expansion of faculty. We just have to be willing to do that, be a willing partner and do things differently than we've done in the past. There's opportunities for growth, for sure.
And the partnership opportunities, so again, back to our conversation earlier this week, Bruce, about not enough, the manufacturers in the region can't find enough qualified, not necessarily degreed people that to hire, and healthcare is the same way, and IT perhaps is the same way. And how do we fill that role in this state, in that, you know, in those areas? And I think being very targeted. The other aspect of our conversation was all the data that we could use to be really precise in targeting students that perhaps, Travis, I mentioned this to you before the meeting started, students that maybe didn't ever consider going to school because they don't see themselves as bachelor's candidates, but if they could get educated to be able to take one of those manufacturing jobs. By the way, these are Bruce's words coming out of my mouth, you know, that there could be an opportunity in that area. And then when we get them here, they might say, well, gosh, I think a bachelor's is in my future, and maybe create a group. Sean, you're brand new, this is your first meeting, so you should have all the answers by now. What struck you about the webinar?
I think you guys said most of it, but I really thought what Mr. Moore said about the 75% really struck me, because I don't see that personally. I was just like, oh, I'm here, and I'm going to stick it through. But I think just making it easier to get students in. We have so many smaller schools around us, and I think just capturing them, I mean, in an hour, have them fill out something online, and they're the right states now. I mean, just something that's quick and fast tracked. But then also at the end it was like action now, and I thought that was something that struck out too. And so I think that for us to benefit from these, I think we need to move on things quickly and get things in the works. So
Thank you.
I think quickly is an important point. You know, we have to get a little faster.
So I'm holding Cheryl to last on purpose, but Travis, I would invite you to hear what you have to think. Small faculty hat, large faculty hat, you tell us, but what did you think?
I certainly am not prepared to represent or speak with the voice of the large faculty on something.
Okay, good enough.
I can only speak for myself. Yeah, this is small. So the thing that struck me actually in the conversation here is, I think Trustee Fitzpatrick said it just right. We're not the average institution, nor is anyone. The the data that they're putting out there, so 75% transfer, without knowing a lot more about what they meant by that, be careful about using any individual piece of data. We need to find out what right state is, what right state should be. My guess is 75% transfer students is nationwide, including 2 years, right, including private, and the mission of a four-year public is a different mission. And part of our mission is certainly to bring in students and send them to the Ohio State University. That may be consistent with what we should do. We don't have the entire four-year range of options in everything. So it's important that we do take that in consideration, that we do data-driven analyses. I think one of the strengths that the board has is that they're not grounded in academia, which means you can look at things from the perspective of the region's needs. I think one of the weaknesses that the board has is that you're not grounded in academia, which means you really need to take that data and talk to the academics, talk to the president, the provost, the faculty, to understand how to translate that data into actions that can be taken in a reasonable stage, or reasonable way. The discussion they have regarding institutional will, it is important that all partners be involved in in every step of the decision if you want to build the institutional will to make really transformative change. If you do something that you feel is right, but that the institutional leaders do not feel is right, then that can become an insurmountable obstacle. So I think data-driven, share it all. From a small F perspective, you can't go wrong.
Right. I want to respond to that, but I don't know how. Because I think that's the tension that we have. When I said that my concern about institutional will is will we allow ourselves excessively to worry about some of the things you said. And I mean that with all due, I think you know exactly how I mean that. That, you know, on the, this is how most do it, they form big, large committees. Well, we're forming a big, large group to advise on this and to get everybody's voice in, sometimes slowing them down. And I'm not trying to disagree. I'm just saying somehow we have to realize that if we try to do it the way it typically been done, we might not be as successful. And I don't know what that looks like, but that's one of the feelings that I have. So we finished last year after the budget meeting in June with the notion of perhaps the board should have a committee on, an ad hoc committee on revenue growth and enrollment growth and so forth. And thinking that over the summer and talking it over with President Schrader, we weren't sure, I wasn't sure that a board committee could act fast enough. So I asked President Schrader to consider, is there another way to do that? So talk about what your plan is and where we're at, and I would like to gather input on this because some board members, this is really new, so you might not have heard of this yet.
So we have formed a growth mindset advisory team. Not just focused exclusively on enrollment, but really thinking of different types of ways to diversify the revenue and grow it. And I like the ideas of getting a few of those 3 to 5 and really focus on that. The committee doesn't have a representative of every group, so we're not in that left column. It does have 13 people on it, in part because it has 4 trustees and a student trustee as well. But there are people who think in an innovative way and are tied into some of the things that we have to do in higher ed to move forward. That follows most of the way I have formed committees up to this point, which has been a departure from the representative and the very large committee. So I think as people are getting more used to that, they see that there's a better way that you can move forward if you if you have people who are innovative and have that opportunity to think outside of the box. There are 13 because it's unlikely everybody's going to be able to be at every meeting, because I think we're going to start off perhaps even weekly in August and September, and then perhaps move to some other schedule. We may be working in work groups, and so you want to be able to have, you know, more than one person really working on something, and then come back together again. We don't, you know, there will be a report, that was in that left column, in December, but we don't expect to be waiting to be implementing some of these things. And what is, I think, wonderful timing is that really coincides with our strategic plan as we're getting that in its final form and beginning the implementation phases. It allows us to use the program effectiveness review information that's coming in as well. It allows us to look at our fiscal sustainability plan and the revenue enhancements as well as the operational efficiencies. So you have a lot of activity that's coming together and a lot of information, including perhaps this webinar to get people to have that shared understanding moving forward. But this provides, I think, that opportunity to knit it together and help prioritize and help identify. So in terms of the institutional will, because this is fitting so well with the way we've done our strategic planning process, which is bottom up, shared priorities, right? We've engaged, what have we done? 6,100 person hours in events so far, which just means that's the amount of time that people are sitting and talking and working together and coming up with these ideas. So I would like, I think it's just the opportune time, because we have this opportunity to have a bit of an update on our strategic plan, and for you to see some of the things that are coming out of that process from the collective that really dovetail into what we need to do, and what we see here and what I wrote down as well. So I think that's interesting to see, and a good investment of our time so far in our strategic planning. And I think that will help the institutional will, because there are champions of these ideas and these projects. And when you bring people together to create that strategic plan, you make it easier to implement, because you have those leaders already in place, those owners.
Well, I think the challenge is we need to make investments. Not all investments pay off. Our reserve levels are still perilously low, but I don't know that we can afford to not make investments. And time is not necessarily on our side. I think this coming year financially we won't need to cut $50 million, but it's going to be a challenge to stay within the budgets that we have established and to hold accountability and maintain discipline that we hopefully learned last year. I imagine as one trustee that we still have folks who are just waiting for it to go back the way it was, and it's not gonna ever, in my opinion. And the need to be action-oriented with a bias towards action and not an action to committees. You all know my favorite saying is that a camel is a thoroughbred designed by committee, right?
Yes.
That's the danger you run into, you know, and how do we move forward quickly? And it does need to jive with the plan. I asked Craig and David to come in here and listen to this, because I'm hoping the board is gonna want, is it Michael? I saw, am I getting it right?
Mike.
Sorry,
It's Mike.
it's Mike?
Yes.
I think the board is gonna be biased towards action, towards results. That's just my opinion, but also, again, not my words, but, you know, to what extent is higher education kind of a legacy business model that needs to be reinvented? And, you know, if any luck at all, maybe we're the first ones to lead out of this woods. You know, and so that's good news. So why don't we get the strategic update? Thank you, everybody. Any other comments or words or thoughts, or anybody want to give our president advice on what she should do next?
Makes me excited. I think we are starting to have a bias towards action.
Mhm.
And I think Dr. Schrader's doing a really good job of the continuous communication.
Thanks. Okay, we have Mike Weehee and David Bright, who are co-chairs along with me in the strategic strategic planning process, and they are, I think you run or grab. Would you two like to sit here?
We can either sit or want us to sit or stand.
Either way, whatever you're comfortable with.
I'm comfortable sitting as far. As long as we have a way to put here.
Yeah, we'll put you two together.
All right, well, I guess I'm gonna kick us off. I want to start by just repeating, I'm David Bright. I'm the chair of the Department of Management and International Business here at Wright State University. For those who may not be familiar with me, I have expertise in organizational change management and organizational development. My research career and also consulting practice would focus on those activities for about 20 years. And I was very excited last year, and this is something of a recap again, but when President Schrader approached me and asked for some perspective on how we could design a process that would really engage our campus community and potentially create the context for culture change here at our institution. And so everything that we've done to this point really has a dual intention. First of all, of course, most important is to get us to a strategic plan, but just as important, that process should create some synergies and create a transformational effect on this, what I describe as the social fabric of our institution. And so what we try to do is create an engaged, very dialogic process where we've tried to reach as many stakeholders as we possibly can, try to create forums in which every voice can be heard, and create a process that allows us to find convergence around the ideas that have the most traction, really, as Dr. Schrader said, in a bottom-up fashion. So I just want that to kind of say that as a preface to what we're going to describe today. Really, what we want to share with you is just an update on where we are, and particularly would like to give you an opportunity to weigh in on the strategic goals that we are now refining. So our agenda, I'm just going to talk very briefly about process plan. We'll talk briefly about vision, mission, values. And again, we want to spend the majority of our time really focusing on the goal statements, which are we are in the process of now refining, and then the other items can give you kind of a flavor for the initiatives and projects that are coming forward. So much of this I've already hinted at. We have followed in what is aligned with a process called appreciative inquiry. It's an appreciative approach. As an alternative to SWOT, what we try to do is a process that follows the assumptions of SOAR. So that stands for strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. And this is a very forward-thinking way of engaging in a strategic planning process. It doesn't cause us to ignore weaknesses or threats, but helps us to reframe those in ways that really help us to take advantage of the opportunities that are available as we think about threats and so forth. So again, we want to renew the infrastructure, social infrastructure of the university. Our real hope has been that we've been able to engage people in a way that helps us to really build a vibrant, grassroots engaged process that can help to re-energize the system. And we have tried to do in just, at this point, we've now been working on this for 8 months. This is a process that typically takes much longer than that. And so we feel like this is about as fast as you could go to get the amount of engagement we have. But I also believe, and I think Dr. Schrader mentioned this, because of the way that we've done this process, we already have energy in the system toward implementation. And in fact, there are changes already underway as a result of this process. I would expect that to accelerate as we move from sort of ideation to really to implementation. And of course, the board is especially interested in measurables, and we are trying to build that into everything that we're doing. So these are the elements of the strategic plan that we are accounting for. This is just a quick map that demonstrates how all the pieces fit together. We now have statements either refined or in draft stage for every single one of these pieces, and they will all be form the essence of the strategic plan. This is a fairly detailed overview how we've done this. Really, it's been 2 phases. We've mostly completed phase 1, which was really focused on helping us to define vision, mission, and values. And in phase 2, which is where we are now working towards the end, this is really designed to help us build the elements of all that I just outlined. And we're now in the process of collating those and moving towards a finalized strategic plan. Our goal is to have all of this done by the Board of Trustees meeting in October. This is a representation of how all those pieces are sort of hierarchically linked. So values, we've defined values in 2 ways, which I'll talk about in just a moment. We have 5 areas of strategic focus that have provided a way of shaping the way that our strategic initiatives are moving forward. And then strategic initiatives, we have 15 project groups, each of which has been developing and proposing project ideas. And so those project ideas will include a number of things that Mike will be talking about in just a moment. All right, our proposed statements of mission and vision. We're hopeful that these are at a stage where they're fairly refined. So mission being that we empower all students and graduates to realize their full potential through integrated and transformational learning, discovery, and experience. I believe you have these in front of you as handouts. Okay. And vision. In the spirit of the Wright brothers, we are known for teaching, research, innovation, and application, centering on our diverse and inclusive culture. We are recognized as a foundational element of the educational, economic, and social fabric of the communities we serve. We have 2 sets of values. One of the things that we learned as we went through the values development process, this comes from research that I've been conducting over about the last 7 or 8 years. We were able to notice 2 patterns in the values that people seem to resonate with. So those values really were values that focus on mission, which is what you see here, and values that focus on character, like how we conduct ourselves and what we're striving to be known for in terms of the quality of the people and of the institution itself. So values that shape our mission, we've distilled down to 3. One is to foster student success. A second, discover, create, and share new knowledge. And a third, to transform our world. Values that define our character, you'll notice these are framed as virtues: principled, visionary, innovative, collaborative, inclusive. We don't want to spend a lot of time on this today, but before we move on, I just want to say quickly, the process we followed to develop these was very comprehensive. So we started with community dialogue. Back in February and March, we had discussions with over 320 people. The ideas from the community dialogue, we did some analysis that allowed us to bring kind of the key, probably about 20 themes around values and mission and vision to a stakeholder summit that many of you were able to participate in March. The stakeholder summit, we refined down that list and used the collective wisdom in the room to really identify where there was convergence and what people most gravitated to. And it's from that work then, the strategic plan steering committee
appointed a small group to craft drafts of these statements, which we then have vetted through the full steering committee, also for the leadership, the university leadership, all across the campus. And we've also collected data to kind of support that these statements do resonate with many of our constituencies and our stakeholders. So before I move forward into the goals, are there any questions or observations about what we've shared with you thus far?
David, you asked us for survey inputs, and it would appear on the surface that you've taken those inputs, not just from us, but others, and actually have done some tailoring of these based on the read that I had before with Mike and now. So can you just talk about the process you went through of taking all those inputs?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So what we've tried to do, especially with the leadership group, is to look at these statements and get individual perspectives. We would, in our survey process, is really designed just to test the amount of support for particular statements. So we would ask for the degree to which people would support a statement overall, and then we break down that statement into its components. And then that allowed us, especially in the leadership meetings, to really zero in on points where there might be some contention or some perspective that we needed to really explore. So, for example, in our vision statement, I think one of our original drafts had a focus on being a national public research university. Those words triggered some very strong reactions among many of the leadership team and also among other members of the campus community. So we revised the language, and that process allowed us to really surface some really important perspectives that we wanted to take into account in drafting final language. So that's how we've used the survey information.
Can you switch back to the values page?
Sure. Which one? These or?
Yeah, right there. Actually, let's see here. This one right here, actually.
Okay.
So first of all, I mean, I applaud you guys on the work that you guys have done, and I know you guys have reached out to me and asked my opinion, and lots and lots of other people, and you guys have taken everything into consideration. You've done a really, really good job of putting this together, and there's not necessarily anything in here that I would disagree with, but I find it, and it's hard to do. I know what you do is very, very hard to do, but I do find it to be generic and not, like, I think it could benefit from being more specific. So, for example, if you look at the second to last line on this page, we want to contribute meaningfully at the local, national, and global level. Well, what else is there, right?
Space Force.
Space Force, right? There we go. We found something new. The first sentence, we want to meet students where they are, right? Again, that's broad. Like, we can't go out there and meet everybody where they are, right? We gotta be something. And we gotta attract people in that wanna be part of what it is that we are, right? We don't wanna be everybody, be everything to everybody, right? We wanna be something, and then we wanna attract the right students to come to this institution that wanna be part of that. So, Doug asked earlier what, asked Bruce what he thought, we should focus on. My opinion is we should focus on STEM. And I think, a lot of what Bruce talked about was the same thing, but, we need to produce for this community, we need to produce more doctors, more nurses, more accountants, more teachers. I mean, we need to create a university where people can come and learn to be a computer scientist and then go out and get a job and support themselves and contribute meaningfully to this community. So what I think would be better, and my opinion is STEM, we should talk about what it is, but we should decide on what it is we want to be and narrow it down and really focus on this is what we're going to be as an organization. Not we're going to meet everyone where they are, we're going to be contributing locally, globally, nationally, whatever. Just narrow it down.
I would just add that the best way to define what you are is to define what you're not. Whatever that is, I
Yeah.
just add that to your conversation.
Yeah, so, and it, you know, I say that in the spirit of trying to, you know, get, to refine it, but I mean, again, I applaud you guys, because you've done a fantastic amount of work, and I don't mean to be critical of it in any way, because it's just really fantastic what you guys have accomplished here.
The challenge of it is hard because you have to, if you pull up the vision and mission statement of, I don't care, let's pick 100 universities across the country, they're probably not much different than this. So to differentiate yourself, and as we've talked about, how do we reinvent the university? Because we actually do need to reinvent it. And you know, you have to find, do those proposed statements, are they really any different than anyone else's? Take out the Wright brothers and so forth. How would that set us apart? How would we, on an elevator ride to a student, how would we explain we're different than Miami University when the values and the missions and so forth are almost 80% covered right between the two on the same thing?
Those discussions were had numerous times amongst leadership, our steering committee, even in our project groups as they've been working and talking about what are we not doing and what should we not do.
And this was the answer?
No, but they had conversations as we were going through what the university does, and then there was the realization of we can't do everything for everyone. So what is it that, as a university, we really do for students? Well, then we had quite a few faculty that would then pipe up and say, what we do is we allow any student to come here to college where they haven't a dream to say, I'm going to get an education. Maybe they're not ready. They're not the valedictorian or the salutatorian. Maybe they weren't the top 10% of class. But they came here, a faculty member or a staff person, saw them, talked to them, and got them through college. If you go to a Miami, an Ohio State, you go to a DePaul, go to Dartmouth, do you get that? No.
I don't know that. I don't know the answer.
So we were, as faculty, were telling us saying, we help those students who want an education, or they think they want an education, and we try to help them through.
Yeah, but that's our jobs, right? What I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to differentiate on is it's not what we do. When we reinvent ourselves, it's what do we need to do. It's a different, comes from a whole different place. I'm not trying to diminish the value of what you do, but I'm gonna tell you right now, it's not any different than 100 other universities across the country. The real issue is if we wanna make strides into new areas so that, one, we grow revenue, we get attendance up and those sort of things that we wanna have, then we need to be something different than what we are and something different than what everybody else is, so that we're not broad brushed. We need to find out why we're number 2 when a student decides we're always second choice. Why is that? I don't think we understand that yet, right? So I'm looking at it totally different, where it's really pushing the reset button on who we've been, not trying to diminish the value of helping a student get through their education at all. It's a different perspective. It's what do we need to be brilliantly successful with the resources that we have.
Let me just offer perspective on my view on the relationship between vision, mission, and values. Well, I think of values as being statements that really should resonate broadly with people who are comprised of an institution, who are affiliated with. They think of this as kind of core to their identity. And so from that perspective, I'm not in what you're saying in terms of generic, could be seen other institutions. It makes sense. Although I would disagree. There are some things that are, if you drill down into the language and the conversations we've had, there are some things that I think make us distinctive here. But generally speaking, our goal with the values statements has been to identify what people think of most commonly in their affiliation with Wright State University, both in terms of what we do and how we do it. When we get to vision and mission, those should be the statements that begin to push us to begin to be forward-thinking. And those, I don't think it's appropriate to have as an objective that vision and mission should be broadly voted on or embraced. I mean, that's nice, But really, they should be pushing people to be uncomfortable, to be thinking toward the future. And really, what really most matters is where the rubber meets the road, how we translate these into action. And so, if we're going to scrutinize statements, I'd actually spend more time on the vision and mission than the values. And I'd also encourage us to move to the goals statement that we're going to present here in just a moment. And also, I know that Dr. Schrader has been working very hard on a strategy statement, which I believe we also haven't filled. So, yeah, so I'd like to maybe suggest we pivot to those statements, and then we maybe come back. Doug, did you have something else you wanted to?
I agree with Trustee Langos and Trustee Fitzpatrick, and we've had this conversation. It seems generic. It seems all-encompassing. It seems like a thoroughbred design by committee to me. And so, you know, I'm glad we're having this conversation, and maybe more, because this board ultimately would vote on this. And so I would encourage you to listen closely to what's being said, because it just seems like we're trying to be everything. I see the word "and" 3 times in the mission statement. That's like, well, we want to make sure you get your thoughts, and we want to make sure you get your thoughts, and we want to make sure you get your thoughts, because it's valuable. But I think the institutional will thing I talked about before is, you know, the key to strategy to me is not what you're going to do, is what you're not going to do. And this says we're going to try to do everything. To me, personally. And I agree with Sean here. That's really hard to do, these statements, but when they're right, they are really powerful. And this doesn't strike me as powerful. So that, I mean, I'm just being honest in my feedback.
Do you want to spend any more time focusing on this?
We're going to need to move in an executive session in not too long, so
Okay.
I think what we're doing is giving you feedback to please consider, and I would encourage trustees, even after this meeting, if you have other thoughts that you'd like Mike and David to hear, that would be helpful, and Cheryl and so forth.
We certainly welcome all that feedback. Yes.
It would be good to pass out the strategy statement, because that is different than what almost all universities do. They don't really articulate how they're going to get to the vision.
Yeah.
And in doing so, it's a very specific way that trims down some of the feeling that we're trying to do everything. And it takes advantage of the fact that we're in Dayton, and it says this is our unique advantage and something that only Wright State can do. So that's kind of the purpose of a strategy statement, is to provide that understanding of how we are all going to be focused on implementing the plan. And then I think as we go into some of the goal statements and that, you'll kind of begin to see some of the things I think that you're searching for.
I have a comment. I guess in any of this, I don't see who we value the students. We say they're our top priority, but nothing says that we value them. And that kind of, I wonder about that. And the other thing was, when I came on here, one of the things I used to like was that there was a cliche called, we take the C student and make them A students. And I thought that just showed you the value of each individual, when you were going to empower them by bringing them from that level. And I don't see that same thing coming out of this. But it's a good thing, but I think we're missing that. We weren't going to be an exclusive type school.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So, Dr. Schrader, I'd like to suggest you walk us through the strategy statement.
Okay, we can do that.
Or as much as you would like to.
As soon as I get a copy of it.
Okay.
Very quickly, Sean.
No, that's fine. Okay, so I think this is going to be a lot to absorb, and I don't think that we have the opportunity to do that, given where we want to need to be thinking within the next 20 minutes. So the idea behind a strategy statement, which is something that I read in the literature that's done in businesses and companies, but is not, as far as I know, been applied to higher education. And it's a way of providing everybody an elevator speech that says it's the how of your strategic plan. Right? The mission is why you exist, the vision is where you're going, right? The values are how you behave, but there isn't the how you get there. So it involves the idea of implementation in a way that's very different than what people usually want. I had the goal of having it be 35 words or less, and it has 3 components. The first is an overall objective. The second component is the scope. That is, we're defining now, the scope could be, this is the area in which we're going to operate. And when you start getting into the scope, you start saying, these are the groups we're focusing on, right? These are our priorities. There's a lot more out there, but our real focus is here. And then the last part of the statement is the advantage. What is unique to Wright State that nobody else can do? And how can we capture that? And so what's put down here in 35 words, it's hard to get all that information in. So this is a relatively early draft. I don't know that this has gone to the steering committee yet, but it's a relatively early draft of trying to write out and articulate how those different phrases relate to objective, scope, and advantage. So I think I want to point out, first of all, that what we're looking at is providing value, right? So it's that value proposition that we're trying to obtain. And one of the things that I thought was very important was talking about the scope. We engaged with many, many different groups of stakeholders, many, in the probably 30 or so different groups. And what we've done actually is saying, when we look at our mission-based values, those 3 mission-based values, it really points to 3 stakeholder groups, not 30, but 3. Students, research partners, and our community partners. Okay? Community partners. And so that, in essence, is in some way is starting to say, we're not trying to be everything to everybody. We're focused on those 3 groups for very specific reasons. And so the words are trying to describe that thought process of how we got to looking at students, research partners, community partners. The distinct advantage that we see is are the communities that we serve, right? Both the Lake Campus and the Dayton Campus. That very strong community engagement. The applied way of looking at the education and the research that has been with the institution from the very beginning. And so it's taking advantage of the fact that we are in the Dayton region and that we have that opportunity for strong partnerships and collaborations, because we can't do everything by ourselves. Not only can we not be everything to everybody, but we can't do it by ourselves. So really taking advantage of the partnerships and the opportunities of the communities we serve. And so in the earlier statement where it says local, national, global, right, we're actually saying, and we can always do a better job of expressing it, that if we focus on those strategic partnerships in the communities we serve, right, we are solving national, global issues right here at the local level with our partners. And so that's really where we were trying to go with this. So in some way that takes the broader aspects of the vision and the mission and starts saying, our attention should really be in implementing our research with our community partners. It should be looking at how we can create that educated workforce with our community partners, right, in the greater country.
You know, actually
mentioned radar country in here, which I don't think I've ever seen on
Yeah.
paper.
Right.
A lot of people actually talk about that, and I think it's great that you mentioned that. The success is at the bottom of the last page.
And one of the advantages, which is also pointed out in there, is that we have both a metropolitan and an urban campus. And we can't forget what advantages that brings us and how we can impact different groups in different ways. So I would just ask you to take some time to absorb that, and then we will certainly collect some additional information on that, but I thought it was important that you saw that along with mission, vision, and so on.
Yeah, I think there's some great things in here that we probably incorporate into that, right? I mean, we are a great return on investment.
Right.
I mean, we are a low-cost provider,
Right.
high-quality, low-cost provider. That is a huge advantage for us. We should emphasize that. We serve the 16-county region around our campuses. I mean, we're not trying to serve the world, right? We're trying to serve the 16 counties around. And then we talk about, some of the things that we do, which this one I take a little bit of issue with. I think it's great that we define what we do. Sensors, security, water quality, and so on. But of the 6 lines that we have there, 3 lines are dedicated to humanities, arts, plays, music, documentaries, historical treatises. That's, I think I want to be known for engineering and science and technology. I understand those other things are interesting and important to a lot of people. I don't think they should be what define this university. We're trying to create jobs for people in our community. We're trying to create research that supports the things that are going on in this community. And I just don't think focusing on humanities gets us there. Not that it's not part of the university, but I don't think it should be our focus.
I appreciate that perspective, and, I think that one thing I just discovered in the last day or so is how many of the program directors at the base come out of the College of Liberal Arts. So there is a huge impact that our arts and humanities graduates have in this local region. Dayton is known for that arts and culture, and that's a draw to the creative class that's going to help drive the economy here in Dayton. So the fact that the university is very strong in that and has world-class programs fits very well with the emphasis that Dayton has and that ability to actually grow the economy and to bring in the engineers, the physicians, the millennials who want to locate downtown and experience that. So I think in coming into this, what we're trying to identify is where are we excellent, right? And it turns out that in the arts and humanities, that really is a niche that Wright State has, that many other institutions don't.
Maybe we just disagree on this, because I would not go that direction at all. I would de-emphasize that, and I would emphasize things that are, really focused on practical jobs. I mean, you go to school and you get a degree in accounting, you can be an accountant, right? You get a degree in liberal arts, sure, you can be lots of different things, right? But I would rather have focused degrees that give people skills for specific job sets.
It doesn't mean that the students won't have that career development and commitment from those programs. So there is a big emphasis on the career development and ability to provide students with, from the day they walk in, with what they need to do to be successful in their career. And so what also is a part of this, which we haven't seen yet, is the idea that every student has a required experiential.
Which I love that piece of it too, yeah.
And makes them ready to hit the ground running when they come on out. And again, that's something.
Still don't feel like they're as prepared.
Sean, this is a philosophical debate. I guess the point is, and I don't disagree that we want to be a world-class university in certain things, but I don't think we want to diminish the criticality and importance of things like liberal arts. Because again, many great leaders came out of the liberal arts, and we don't want to diminish what we're producing there. But I agree, research, scientists, STEM graduates all have a vital role in this region as well.
I believe that the College of Liberal Arts is the largest college, I believe, in terms of enrollment on campus. So just
First
from
or second.
First or second.
We're
So
gonna grow.
So certainly from a pragmatic standpoint, Sean, there's a lot to agree with what you said. From a supply versus demand standpoint, there is a demand, strong demand for liberal arts degrees in education.
I don't disagree with that, and you can go to MIT and get a degree in liberal arts also, right? But that's not what MIT is known for.
Right.
And, I think you can come here and get a degree in liberal arts, but it's not what I want to be known for.
I think, earlier it was very, very well stated in the webinar to say the marriage of that liberal arts degree with the certificate in web design and development or, nonprofit leadership or, I think that that's really looking at, first of all, not letting the students just say, I'm an English major and I don't see anybody having an ad for an English graduate. It's incumbent upon us as a university to help them see what the opportunities are and to get them prepared with these things that are outside the curriculum, the co-curricular experiences.
Well, I think there's no question that liberal arts makes better technologists, or however you want to say it. But from the webinar, the number one reason that a student goes to school, whether they're direct from high school, according to the webinar, or an adult returning to school, is they want either a job or a better job. And I think this is an incredibly difficult bridge to gap because we have very talented staff and faculty on all sides of this argument. But really, to me, that's why the mission is we focus on student success. We let the student decide what the level of success is. And so then we get to make investments somewhere beneath the mission statement. Our margin in return that they talked about in the webinar, we think is stronger, better in these areas and in these areas. But I have a little bit of a danger in becoming a technical school or job training school. We can become too focusedly narrowed. That's just my opinion. But to me, it focuses on the student. We focus on student success, period. Then it's a resource decision on where we invest the resources in terms of, I would lean more heavily towards the skills that will more readily lead to a job, because I do believe that's why people go to school. But I think if we get in this debate, humanities, liberal arts versus STEM and all that stuff, that's ultimately a losing debate for us.
For you, because you're not a student, right?
What's that?
Because you're not a student. It's a losing debate because you're not a student. The whole idea is that the student is coming here and they're going to decide if they want to be liberal arts or if they want to be computer science, whatever it may be. That's my decision as a student. So if that's what I decide, we should be empowering our students. Okay, you may be an English major or you may be a theater major, but we're going to empower you to do more than just theater. We're going to empower you to do more than just English. We're going to show you cybersecurity and how that plays a role in your degree. Where's the future going? I think that's where we lose this argument.
I get back to how to define student success. Because like you said, you should be investing in student success. What does that mean?
We had these exact conversations, and it's very interesting because we, I know, made changes in a number of these statements to allow for that difference in what people feel would mean that they were successful. That it doesn't mean you have to be the CEO, right? People have dreams and they're at varying levels, and I think it's our job to help them get there.
But, yes. And
Yeah,
we can't be everything to everybody.
I don't think we
leads
should
back
do
to-
that, right? Because everybody has different dreams, and we're not here to serve everybody and all their dreams.
Yeah, you gotta go back to, Doug, what you and I talked about is who's the customer? And what's the profile of the customer we're trying to serve? So substitute student for customer. And who are the students that we want? They're probably within 100 miles of here, right? Best case. And what are we trying to serve them with? Well, they need jobs, right? They need an opportunity. So if they're going to stay in the region, then what do we need to train them on or educate them on to stay in the region? It goes down to understanding what, we're really selling this school. What are we trying to sell, right? We're selling an education to a particular type of individual, and you have to dissect those individuals and do the demographics around them so you understand, I'm gonna invest over here because there's more of them and an opportunity for the school, right? For enrollment purposes, right, and revenue and so forth, than there is over in humanities, as an example, right? So you have to, we haven't done that work.
And it doesn't mean we don't teach humanities and
Sure.
liberal arts and teach it
Sure.
at a world-class level.
Right.
It's, I think that's the debate here, is what are we known for? What can we be testing the world at that people know and will make a decision based on? And I don't have an answer for you necessarily, but I think that's the concern I feel with all this work is really good, but it's just so broad, I'm not sure how it differentiates. And I don't know how business succeeds, and I apologize to our faculty in the room, that's just how I think. I don't know how business succeeds if it's trying to be everything to everybody. It causes you to spread your resources way too thin, you end up pretty good at a lot of things, but not world-class at any.
You have to
In my,
invest- ultimately, you have to invest where the jobs of the future are. Because that's what success is. Students come out and it doesn't have to be any particular type of job, but where the jobs are necessarily going to be in this region for the next few decades. And that's how we're
I
going
can
to.
add, in our organization, we look at workforce trends, job hires, educational needs, workforce, that's what we do. I can tell you, one of the biggest issues within industry, what they're looking for, is someone trained and can they think. You get a liberal arts degree, we teach you how to think. You think critically.
I get it.
And
As
then
an
you can get
employer,
trained.
buy in.
I mean, as a player, I'm not sure people that can think, right? I say, okay, I have a computer science job, I need someone has a computer science degree, right? Of course I need someone that can think, right?
And
can
be
solve
critical,
problems,
look at
and be
options
critical,
to address
and
problems.
has a degree in
And we can do
computer
that.
science.
We're
If you
not
have a
gonna
degree in computer science, you already have process thinking.
Right.
Right, so it's not, those aren't liberal arts people. for the most part.
But I think that comes from, that doesn't just come from computer science. I think that comes from a much broader view of the world and people and the problems that they face. I don't think that you can solve all problems with a computer science degree in computer science. I think you have to be able to think broader than that.
You also have to remember
And
that
I don't wanna get away with it.
companies hire people to also mold them into what they want them to be, right? So some of the best people I've ever hired had associate's degrees, and we love that because then they come into the company young, we culturally get them in the culture of the company, and we take it the rest of the way. Our job is to make them progress through the organization, right? But as long as they've got that core value associated with what we're hiring them for, that's really all we cared about. Because, and they become productive instantly. And that's what we wanted.
So we're not gonna solve it today, and I will say this is so critically important that despite the board having a goal, I hesitate to say this, of having a strategic plan approved by October, this is so doggone important to me that we're gonna need to do the work it takes to get to where we need to be on this. And we're not gonna solve that today. I think you start with where the students are. Ask the students, why do you go to college? And that needs to be the starting place. Right, so I don't know that we're gonna answer it today, and we need to go into the executive session out of respect for everybody's time. So I'll one time around the table, any final comments on this? I hope it was helpful for you for this feedback. I kind of feel like I'm rushing it, but we also have a schedule that we're trying to stay to.
Can I just make one comment?
Sure.
And then maybe we're on the path, Cheryl, to get to what I was expecting. This is a really good thought piece, and I think, just by the conversation, we see it's invigorating us to be critical and think about, what do we want. But in the end, I was expecting, we're gonna get to the point where we have a kind of a one page. These are our key strategic objectives.
Yep.
And they are going to drive us towards the strategy we put in place. And I'm a pretty simple business guy, and I just think we've got to generate enrollment, we've got to have retention, we've got to have revenue, we've got to have growth. It's that prosperity gap thing. And then 12 months from now, I should be able to say, how are we doing and how do we know it? Because right now, I can look at this and I can try to parse all the words in here, and I'm not quite sure how to measure all these warm fuzzy words on whether we're making progress or not.
Oh, we will get there. This other sheet that came around talks a little bit about what are the goal statements for these 5 areas of strategic focus, which you will see.
They're still warm and fuzzy.
They're still warm and fuzzy, but they are sort of the themes that emerged through the project groups in a way that I think ties into many of the words in the webinar earlier today. For example, collaborative delivery of services, and trying to be much more time efficient and be able to respond to the students and in processes and so on.
This is in no particular order.
No, it's in no particular order. And then there are, if you can just flip one more page, and we can get the slides to you. No, if you're, yes.
This one?
Yes. So the strategic initiatives down at the bottom are refer to the project groups that the projects that people are working on, and they started with over 70 and now have been reduced down.
So just about 50, they reduced
to about
again on
50,
Thursday.
and they continue to refine them, combine them, and so on. So I think a lot of what people are looking at are what is at the moment under development that will help say what are those particular projects that we're going to define, and then how do we wrap around the assessment, the evaluation, right, the measurement of the progress and so on. And because these are project group oriented, that is all fit in with this as we go through those with the strategic plan. So there's a built-in mechanism to evaluate your progress and your goals, and sunset things and add things and take care of opportunities as well.
I'll share a level of skepticism that those bottom 12 boxes are going to generate those really important objectives that we collectively need to focus on to ensure that we're going to be successful. So I'm going to patiently wait and see, but I'm skeptical.
I would just add one more thing, and that is that, many of us around the table are business people, and many of the issues we talk about every meeting have to do with financial and business success and, budgets and those kinds of things. I think one of our goals should be to survive and succeed financially as a business, to keep the lights on and keep the doors open and keep offering for the next 50 years what we've offered for the past 50 years.
Financial sustainability, right?
Yeah, financial sustainability.
One last
I didn't
comment.
see it on there.
One last comment from me, and then I'll shut up. I would encourage you to go look at the Ohio Prosperity Program that's posted online by DeWine and Husted, and by Cordray, by the way, so it doesn't make any difference who's gonna win here, but if you look at that and the amount and the investment that they're talking about from the state perspective, where they want that investment focused on, guess where it is? It's in satisfying for the jobs that we have in each one of our regions. And we have an opportunity to take the lead and step up to do that, and I would encourage us to think about that really hardly.
Wise strategist, Howard, thank you very much. I would like to now move us into executive session by offering a motion. And so to make sure I do it right, at this time I move that the board enter into executive session to discuss purchase or sale of real estate, collective bargaining, pending or imminent court action. Do I have a second, please? Thank you, Anuj. In accordance with the Ohio Open Meetings Law, the board, after a majority of quorum and by roll call vote, determines to hold a special executive session by offering the following resolution. Resolved that the Wright State University Board of Trustees agreed to hold an executive session on Friday, August 17th, 2018, and be it further resolved that pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code 121.22G, the following issues may be discussed in executive session: purchase or sale of real estate, collective bargaining, pending or imminent court action. I've made the motion. There is a second. Roll call vote, Mr. Chairman.
Bridges.
Yes.
Mr. Thacker.
Yes.
Fitzpatrick. Yes. Dr. Doyle.
Yes.
Mr. Langos.
Yes.
Chair Moore.
Yes.
Ms. Ramos.
Yes.